The Renaissance, Rebirth of Art and Culture in Europe, written by Haya Vent, narrated by Kara Miller. Chapter 1, Introduction to the Renaissance. The Renaissance, meaning rebirth in French, marked a profound transformation in art, culture, and thought that began in Italy during the 14th century and spread across Europe over the following centuries. It is often regarded as the bridge between the Middle Ages and the modern era, a time when the classical ideas of ancient Greece and Rome were rediscovered and became central to European culture. The Renaissance was not merely an artistic movement. It was a period of intellectual, scientific, and cultural awakening, laying the foundation for many aspects of the modern world. This period saw the decline of medieval feudalism and the rise of a more urban, human-centered society. It was characterized by an intense interest in humanism, which focused on the value and agency of the individual, the importance of education, and the study of classical texts. Humanists believed that by studying the works of ancient philosophers, writers, and artists, they could better understand human nature and improve society. This intellectual revival gave birth to new ideas in philosophy, politics, literature, and art that reshaped European culture. The Renaissance was also marked by a revival of interest in the visual arts. Artists sought to depict the human form with greater accuracy and realism, drawing on the techniques and principles of classical antiquity. The development of perspective, for example, allowed artists to create the illusion of depth and space on a two-dimensional surface. This innovation transformed painting and sculpture, making it possible to capture the world in a way that had never been done before. The Renaissance was also a time of great political and social change. The Italian city-states, such as Florence, Venice, and Rome, became powerful centers of culture, commerce, and art. Wealthy patrons, including the powerful Medici family, funded many of the era's greatest artists and thinkers, enabling the flourishing of artistic and intellectual achievements. The era also saw the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg, which made books more accessible and allowed ideas to spread rapidly, contributing to the rapid expansion of Renaissance culture. The Renaissance reached its zenith in the 15th and 16th centuries, particularly in Italy, where figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael became icons of the movement. Their contributions to art and science continue to influence modern culture, making the Renaissance a pivotal period in history. As we explore the Renaissance in this book, we will delve deeper into the ideas, events, and individuals that shaped this extraordinary cultural revolution. Defining the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a transformative period in European history, marking a profound cultural, intellectual, and artistic shift that spanned from the 14th to the 17th century. It is often described as the rebirth of classical antiquity, as it witnessed the revival of ancient Greek and Roman ideals, philosophies, and art forms. The term Renaissance itself is derived from the French word for rebirth, reflecting the period's deep engagement with the rediscovery of classical knowledge and the rejuvenation of human potential. At its core, the Renaissance represented a fundamental change in how people viewed themselves and the world around them. During the Middle Ages, the focus of life had largely been religious, with the Catholic Church playing a dominant role in shaping society's values and worldview. However, the Renaissance introduced a new focus on the individual, human achievement, and secular life, driven by the belief that humans had the capacity to shape their own destinies. This shift is embodied in the movement known as humanism, which emphasized the study of classical texts and the celebration of human potential. Humanists argued that by looking back to the achievements of ancient Greece and Rome, individuals could unlock new possibilities for intellectual and artistic expression. In the realm of art, the Renaissance ushered in a revolution of style and technique. Artists sought to represent the human form with greater realism and accuracy, using techniques such as linear perspective to create the illusion of depth on flat surfaces. This era produced some of the most celebrated masterpieces in Western art, including Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, and Raphael's School of Athens. These works not only demonstrated technical mastery, but also explored themes of human experience, beauty, and the natural world in ways that had never been seen before. The Renaissance was also a time of significant scientific and intellectual progress. Scholars like Copernicus, Galileo, and Vesalius challenged long-standing ideas about the universe, the human body, and the laws of nature. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century played a crucial role in spreading Renaissance ideas far and wide, making knowledge more accessible to a broader audience and contributing to the intellectual climate of the period. Ultimately, the Renaissance was not a single event, but a sweeping cultural movement that reshaped Europe and laid the foundations for the modern world. It celebrated the pursuit of knowledge, the exploration of human potential, and the flourishing of creativity, marking a pivotal chapter in the history of Western civilization. Historical context: from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. The transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance was not a sudden shift, but rather a gradual evolution that unfolded over several centuries. The Middle Ages, often referred to as the Dark Ages, spanned roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, and was marked by a predominantly agrarian society, feudalism, and the dominance of the Catholic Church. During this time, Europe was largely fragmented into small kingdoms, and much of the intellectual and cultural development was centered around religious institutions. The Church had a significant influence on daily life, and much of the period's education and learning were dictated by religious teachings. Despite the challenges of the time, including invasions, plagues, and social instability, the Middle Ages also laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. The collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century led to a loss of classical knowledge in Western Europe. However, during the Middle Ages, this knowledge was preserved and passed down by scholars, particularly in monasteries and Islamic centers of learning. Additionally, the rise of universities in the 12th and 13th centuries began to foster a new wave of intellectual curiosity, even though education remained closely linked to religion and theology. Several factors contributed to the eventual break from the medieval worldview and the emergence of the Renaissance. One key event was the Black Death of the 14th century, which devastated Europe's population and caused widespread economic and social disruption. The subsequent labor shortages and societal upheavals shifted the balance of power, leading to the decline of feudalism and the rise of more centralized political systems. This created an environment in which new ideas could flourish. Another crucial factor was the gradual rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts. In the 14th and 15th centuries, scholars in Italy and other parts of Europe began to explore the works of classical writers, such as Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero, that had been largely forgotten during the Middle Ages. The revival of these texts inspired a new intellectual movement, humanism, that emphasized the study of classical antiquity and the potential of human achievement. This rediscovery of ancient knowledge was made more accessible by the invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century, which allowed ideas to spread quickly across Europe. By the 15th century, the conditions were ripe for a cultural rebirth. The political stability of Italian city-states like Florence, Venice, and Rome, combined with the rise of wealthy merchant families, provided the financial and social conditions for a flourishing of art, science, and culture. This marked the dawn of the Renaissance, a period in which the ideas of humanism, artistic innovation, and intellectual inquiry combined to create one of the most significant cultural movements in history. Key themes of the Renaissance. The Renaissance, often described as a cultural revolution, was defined by several key themes that transformed the way people viewed art, culture, science, and human existence. These themes not only reshaped the intellectual and artistic landscapes of Europe, but also laid the foundations for modern thought and society. The most prominent themes include humanism, the revival of classical antiquity, individualism, secularism, and a new approach to science and exploration. One of the central themes of the Renaissance was humanism, an intellectual movement that placed emphasis on the value of human beings, their potential for achievement, and the study of classical texts. Humanists sought to revive the learning of ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, focusing on literature, philosophy, history, and rhetoric. They believed that studying the works of classical writers could lead to a more enlightened society, one that valued the capabilities of individuals to shape their own destinies. This shift away from the purely religious focus of the Middle Ages encouraged a broader view of human potential and intellect. The revival of classical antiquity was another defining theme. Renaissance artists, architects, and thinkers turned to the classical world for inspiration, drawing on the art, architecture, and philosophies of ancient Greece and Rome. Classical ideals of proportion, symmetry, and harmony were reflected in the art of the period, leading to the creation of masterpieces that emphasized realism, naturalism, and the beauty of the human form. This revival also sparked a renewed interest in the writings of ancient philosophers, such as Plato and Aristotle, whose ideas influenced Renaissance thought in fields such as ethics, politics, and science. The theme of individualism became increasingly prominent during the Renaissance. As humanists celebrated the individual's ability to reason, create, and achieve greatness, there was a shift toward recognizing personal identity and achievement. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael pushed the boundaries of their craft, expressing their unique talents and visions. In literature, writers such as Petrarch and Machiavelli explored themes of personal ambition and the complexities of human nature. Secularism was another key theme that distinguished the Renaissance from the religiously dominated Middle Ages. While the church remained powerful, Renaissance thinkers and artists began to explore subjects outside the purely religious domain, focusing on human life, nature, and the material world. This shift is evident in the art of the period, where religious themes were balanced with depictions of daily life, mythology, and portraiture. Finally, the Renaissance was characterized by a new approach to science and exploration. The period saw significant advancements in various scientific fields, driven by the observation of the natural world and the application of reason and experimentation. Figures like Galileo, Copernicus, and Vesalius revolutionized our understanding of the universe, the human body, and the natural world. Additionally, the Renaissance sparked a wave of exploration as explorers like Columbus and Magellan ventured into unknown territories, reshaping Europe's view of the world. These themes of discovery and inquiry would set the stage for the modern scientific and geographical advancements that followed. The role of Italy in the Renaissance. Italy played a pivotal role in the development of the Renaissance, acting as both the birthplace and the heart of this transformative cultural movement. The unique political, economic, and social conditions of Italian city-states provided the fertile ground for the flourishing of art, architecture, philosophy, and science that defined the Renaissance. Italy's geographic position, wealth, and intellectual environment made it the ideal setting for the rebirth of classical knowledge and the birth of new artistic and intellectual ideals. One of the most significant factors in Italy's central role in the Renaissance was the presence of powerful and wealthy city-states, particularly Florence, Venice, and Rome. These city-states operated independently and were often in competition with one another, which led to a thriving environment for trade, commerce, and culture. Wealthy families, such as the Medici in Florence, played a critical role in fostering the arts by commissioning works from renowned artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Botticelli. The patronage of these influential families not only funded artistic and architectural endeavors, but also ensured that the works created during this time became symbols of prestige and power. Florence, in particular, emerged as the intellectual and artistic epicenter of the Renaissance. The city was home to brilliant scholars, artists, and philosophers, many of whom were inspired by the study of classical texts rediscovered during the period. Florence also boasted one of the most advanced banking systems in Europe, which helped to finance the art and architecture that became synonymous with the Renaissance. The Medici family, as rulers and patrons, played an instrumental role in supporting the work of key Renaissance figures, including the sculptor Donatello and the architect Filippo Brunelleschi. Rome, under the auspices of the Catholic Church, also became a major center of Renaissance activity. The church not only commissioned some of the period's greatest artistic works, including Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling and Raphael's frescoes, but also became a symbol of the intersection between religion and humanist ideals. Rome's prominence in the Renaissance was further enhanced by the patronage of popes such as Julius II and Leo X, who sought to assert the church's political and cultural power through monumental art and architecture. Venice, with its thriving trade routes and unique position as a crossroads between the East and West, contributed significantly to the Renaissance's artistic development, especially in the fields of painting and sculpture. The city's distinctive blend of Byzantine, Islamic, and classical influences gave rise to a unique artistic style that was reflected in the works of painters like Titian and Tintoretto. Overall, Italy's diverse city-states, rich cultural heritage, and political dynamics played an indispensable role in shaping the Renaissance. The combination of intellectual curiosity, political patronage, and artistic innovation that flourished in Italy made it the cradle of one of history's most significant cultural revolutions. The Renaissance as a cultural revolution. The Renaissance is often described as a cultural revolution because it radically transformed the intellectual, artistic, and social fabric of Europe. It represented a shift away from the medieval mindset, which was heavily influenced by the church, and a focus on religious life, toward a new emphasis on humanism, individualism, and the celebration of human achievement. This shift in thought and culture marked a break from centuries of feudalism and stagnation, allowing for the flourishing of new ideas, art forms, and philosophies that would shape the modern world. One of the most profound aspects of the Renaissance was its emphasis on humanism, which redefined the way people understood themselves and their place in the world. Humanism celebrated the potential of the individual and the pursuit of knowledge. This intellectual movement sought to revive and study the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome, placing great value on literature, philosophy, and the arts. By focusing on the achievements of ancient civilizations, humanists believed that individuals could reach their highest potential and improve society as a whole. This new perspective inspired a generation of thinkers, writers, and artists to explore new ways of interpreting the world and to question established norms. Artistically, the Renaissance was a revolution in both form and content. The period saw the development of new techniques, such as linear perspective, which allowed artists to create more realistic and lifelike representations of the world. The study of human anatomy and the use of light and shadow gave rise to stunningly accurate depictions of the human form. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael pushed the boundaries of artistic expression, producing works that were not only visually striking, but also deeply philosophical, exploring themes of human emotion, nature, and the divine. The Renaissance also marked a shift in the subjects of art, as religious themes were balanced with depictions of mythology, portraiture, and everyday life, reflecting the era's growing interest in the secular world. In addition to transforming art, the Renaissance brought about significant changes in science and exploration. Thinkers like Copernicus and Galileo challenged the medieval view of the cosmos, laying the groundwork for the scientific revolution. The Renaissance also saw the beginning of the Age of Exploration, as explorers such as Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama ventured into unknown territories, reshaping Europe's understanding of the world. Ultimately, the Renaissance was not just a period of artistic or intellectual achievement, but a cultural revolution that redefined how people thought about themselves, the world, and their place within it. By challenging the old order and embracing the possibilities of human potential, the Renaissance set the stage for the modern world, influencing everything from politics and philosophy to art and science. Chapter 2: The Origins and Beginnings of the Renaissance. The origins of the Renaissance can be traced back to a confluence of historical, intellectual, and socioeconomic factors that unfolded over centuries, setting the stage for the cultural transformation that would sweep across Europe. Though the Renaissance is often associated with the 14th century, its roots lie in the preceding centuries, especially the decline of the medieval period and the gradual rediscovery of classical knowledge. The collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century marked the beginning of the Middle Ages, a period often characterized by political instability, economic decline, and the dominance of the Catholic Church. During this time, much of Europe experienced a decline in literacy and intellectual pursuits, with the focus on religious life and survival rather than the exploration of secular knowledge. However, remnants of classical antiquity, particularly ancient Greek and Roman texts, were preserved in Byzantine and Islamic libraries. It wasn't until the 12th and 13th centuries that Europe began to rediscover these texts, thanks in large part to the translation efforts of scholars in the Islamic world. The movement to translate and study classical works reignited interest in ancient philosophy, science, and art, laying the groundwork for the intellectual transformation that would define the Renaissance. The 14th century, particularly in Italy, saw significant shifts that set the Renaissance in motion. The Black Death of the mid-14th century decimated Europe's population, leading to economic and social upheaval. This crisis, however, also created a climate ripe for change. With a reduced labor force, there was an increased demand for skilled artisans, leading to an expansion of the arts and crafts. Wealth began to concentrate in the hands of merchants and bankers, particularly in Italian city-states such as Florence, Venice, and Genoa. These cities became centers of commerce, and with their newfound wealth came a desire to display power and influence through patronage of the arts. In Italy, the influence of the Medici family in Florence was crucial in fostering the Renaissance. As one of the wealthiest families in Europe, they used their fortune to support artists, architects, and scholars, making Florence a cultural hub. The rise of humanism during this time, a movement focused on reviving the study of classical antiquity and celebrating the human experience, was a major intellectual force. Scholars like Petrarch, often regarded as the father of humanism, sought to revive the ancient texts and philosophies of Greece and Rome, believing that they offered valuable insights into human nature and society. By the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the Renaissance had begun to take shape in Italy as these cultural, economic, and intellectual factors converged. The rediscovery of classical knowledge, the growth of wealthy city-states, and the patronage of influential families all contributed to the emergence of a new cultural era. The Renaissance was no longer a distant future, but a present reality, one that would soon spread beyond Italy's borders to influence all of Europe. The fall of Constantinople and the spread of knowledge. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was a pivotal event that significantly contributed to the spread of knowledge and the subsequent rise of the Renaissance in Europe. As the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople had long been a major center of learning, culture, and trade. When the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Mehmed II, captured the city, it marked the end of one of the most enduring civilizations in history, and the beginning of a new era. However, the fall of Constantinople also led to an unexpected and far-reaching consequence: the migration of scholars, manuscripts, and knowledge to the West. Before its fall, Constantinople had been a key repository of ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved by Byzantine scholars. These works, many of which were lost to Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire, offered a wealth of knowledge on philosophy, science, mathematics, and the arts. As the Ottomans advanced on the city, many Byzantine scholars fled to Italy and other parts of Europe, bringing with them precious manuscripts that contained the works of classical authors such as Plato, Aristotle, and Ptolemy. These manuscripts, along with the scholars' knowledge of Greek and Latin, played a crucial role in sparking the intellectual revival that would define the Renaissance. In Italy, particularly in the city-states of Florence and Rome, these scholars were welcomed by humanists and academics, eager to rediscover the lost works of antiquity. The influx of Byzantine intellectuals not only enriched the intellectual climate, but also facilitated the direct study and translation of classical texts. Scholars like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola became instrumental in spreading these ancient ideas, integrating them with contemporary thought and reshaping European philosophy and science. The renewed interest in classical antiquity led to a shift in intellectual focus, moving away from the medieval emphasis on theology and religious dogma to a celebration of humanism, which emphasized the potential for individual achievement and the study of the natural world. The migration of these scholars and their texts also contributed to the growth of libraries and the expansion of learning across Europe. The printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the 1450s, further accelerated the spread of knowledge, making classical works more accessible and enabling ideas to circulate quickly. The fall of Constantinople, while a tragic loss for the Byzantine Empire, thus became a catalyst for the spread of ancient knowledge, sparking an intellectual awakening that would shape the course of European history and lay the foundation for the Renaissance. Humanism, the rise of classical antiquity. Humanism, one of the most significant intellectual movements of the Renaissance, was rooted in the revival of classical antiquity and the belief that the study of ancient Greek and Roman texts could lead to the flourishing of both the individual and society. Emerging in the 14th century, humanism marked a sharp break from the medieval scholasticism that had dominated European thought, which was primarily focused on theology and religious teachings. Instead, humanists looked to the works of classical authors, such as Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Virgil, for inspiration, believing that these ancient texts contained wisdom that could help guide and improve human life. The roots of humanism can be traced to the intellectual climate in Italy, particularly in cities like Florence, where scholars, poets, and artists began to revive interest in the classical past. The rediscovery of ancient manuscripts, particularly after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, allowed scholars to delve deeper into the works of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Humanists studied these texts not only for their philosophical and literary value, but also for their insights into human nature, ethics, and politics. They believed that by understanding the achievements of ancient civilizations, individuals could better understand their own capabilities and potential. At the core of humanism was the idea that humans were capable of reason, creativity, and self-improvement. This focus on the potential of the individual was revolutionary, as it emphasized the value of human experience and agency, contrasting sharply with the medieval focus on divine will and the afterlife. Humanism encouraged a more secular worldview, though it did not entirely reject religious belief. Rather, it sought to harmonize classical knowledge with Christian teachings, creating a more balanced and holistic understanding of the human condition. The influence of humanism was far-reaching. It had a profound impact on Renaissance art, as artists sought to represent the human form with greater realism and emotion, inspired by the study of classical sculptures and paintings. In literature, Humanist writers such as Petrarch, Erasmus, and Machiavelli explored themes of individualism, politics, and human nature. In philosophy, thinkers like Pico della Mirandola argued for the inherent dignity and potential of human beings, emphasizing free will and the pursuit of knowledge. Ultimately, humanism's rise during the Renaissance was not merely an academic pursuit, but a cultural revolution. It reshaped the way people viewed themselves, their world, and their potential, laying the foundation for many of the intellectual, artistic, and scientific advancements that followed in the modern era. By reconnecting with the ideas of classical antiquity, humanists helped to usher in a new age of intellectual curiosity and achievement. The influence of ancient Greek and Roman culture. The Renaissance was profoundly shaped by the rediscovery and embrace of ancient Greek and Roman culture, which provided the intellectual and artistic foundations for many of the period's innovations. During the Middle Ages, much of the knowledge of classical antiquity had been lost or forgotten in Western Europe, particularly after the fall of the Roman Empire. However, by the 14th century, the Renaissance saw a renewed interest in these ancient civilizations as scholars and artists looked to their achievements for inspiration. The influence of Greek and Roman culture was felt in almost every aspect of Renaissance life, from philosophy and literature to art and architecture. The intellectual movement of humanism was at the heart of the Renaissance's revival of classical culture. Humanists believed that by studying the works of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, writers, and historians, they could better understand human nature, ethics, and society. Figures such as Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Virgil became central to Renaissance thought, and their ideas were used to challenge medieval scholasticism and its emphasis on theology. This intellectual shift fostered a more secular approach to knowledge, one that valued individual achievement, reason, and the exploration of the human experience. In art, the influence of ancient Greece and Rome was particularly evident in the renewed focus on the human form. Renaissance artists sought to capture the beauty and proportion of the human body, drawing inspiration from the sculptures of classical antiquity. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo studied ancient texts on anatomy and proportion, leading to more realistic depictions of the human figure. The concept of perspective, which had been used by ancient Greek and Roman architects, was also revived, allowing artists to create the illusion of depth and space on a two-dimensional surface. These artistic innovations allowed for a more naturalistic representation of both the human body and the world. In architecture, Renaissance builders looked to Roman structures for inspiration. The use of columns, arches, and domes, hallmarks of Roman design, were incorporated into new buildings, such as the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which was designed by Donato Bramante and later completed by Michelangelo. The symmetry and balance of Roman architecture provided a model for Renaissance buildings, which emphasized harmony and proportion. The influence of Greek and Roman culture also extended to politics and government. Renaissance thinkers, inspired by classical texts, sought to create more rational and human-centered political systems. The writings of ancient philosophers such as Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Politics provided a framework for Renaissance thinkers to explore ideas about democracy, governance, and the role of the individual in society. Overall, the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman culture was one of the most defining aspects of the Renaissance. The ideas, art, and architecture of classical antiquity not only shaped the Renaissance, but also laid the foundation for the modern world. By reviving these ancient traditions, Renaissance scholars and artists were able to create a new cultural movement that celebrated human potential and achievement, forever changing the course of Western civilization. Early Renaissance figures and movements. The early Renaissance, spanning roughly from the 14th to the early 15th century, marked the beginning of a profound cultural shift in Europe. During this time, key figures and movements laid the groundwork for the full blossoming of the Renaissance in later years. The the period was characterized by the emergence of a new artistic style, an increasing interest in the study of classical antiquity, and the development of humanist thought. While the Renaissance was a gradual evolution, the figures and movements of the early Renaissance set the stage for the revolution in art, philosophy, and science that would define the era. One of the most important figures of the early Renaissance was Giotto di Bondone, an Italian painter often credited with revolutionizing art by moving away from the flat, stylized figures of medieval art and toward more realistic representations. His frescoes in the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua are considered masterpieces of this period, showcasing a newfound emphasis on human emotion, depth, and naturalism. Giotto's work inspired later artists, paving the way for the use of perspective, shadow, and anatomy in painting. Another key figure was Filippo Brunelleschi, an architect and engineer whose innovations in architecture helped define the early Renaissance. His most famous achievement is the design of the dome for the Florence Cathedral, a feat of engineering that had never been accomplished before. Brunelleschi's work, which drew on principles of classical Roman architecture, demonstrated the Renaissance's growing interest in symmetry, proportion, and the application of scientific principles to art and design. The poet and scholar Petrarch, often considered the father of humanism, was instrumental in reviving interest in the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome. His study of ancient Latin and Greek works, particularly those of Cicero and Virgil, inspired many of the intellectuals of the period to look back at antiquity for guidance. Petrarch's emphasis on the value of individual experience and his focus on the importance of learning and self-improvement helped to shape the humanist movement that would define the Renaissance. Donatello, a sculptor of the early Renaissance, made significant strides in the realistic portrayal of the human form. His bronze statue of David is one of the earliest examples of Renaissance sculpture, showcasing a naturalistic approach to human anatomy and expression. Donatello's work was influential in the development of Renaissance sculpture, emphasizing the study of human figures and the expression of emotional depth. The intellectual climate of the early Renaissance was also shaped by movements such as humanism, which promoted the study of classical antiquity and emphasized the potential of human beings. This intellectual revolution was embodied in figures like Leonardo Bruni, who translated important Greek texts into Latin and helped spread humanist ideas across Italy and beyond. The early Renaissance laid the intellectual and artistic foundations for the later, more fully realized Renaissance, with figures such as Giotto, Brunelleschi, Petrarch, and Donatello playing pivotal roles in the cultural transformation that was unfolding. The role of the Medici family in Florence. The Medici family played a crucial role in shaping the course of the Renaissance, particularly in Florence, where they emerged as one of the most powerful and influential families of the period. Their impact on the arts, politics, and intellectual life helped to foster the cultural revolution that defined the Renaissance, making Florence a vibrant hub of artistic and intellectual activity. The Medici's wealth, political influence, and patronage of the arts provided the foundation for many of the Renaissance's most iconic achievements. The Medici family's rise to prominence began in the 14th century with Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, who established the family's banking empire. The Medici Bank became one of the wealthiest and most powerful financial institutions in Europe, allowing the family to amass significant wealth and influence. Giovanni's success set the stage for his son, Cosimo de' Medici, to take control and become the de facto ruler of Florence. Although Cosimo did not hold an official title of power, his political acumen and ability to influence Florence's ruling bodies effectively made him the city's leader. Under Cosimo's leadership, Florence flourished economically, politically, and culturally. His control over the banking system allowed him to accumulate vast wealth, which he used to support the city's artistic and intellectual endeavors. Cosimo was a dedicated patron of the arts and played a central role in promoting the work of artists, architects, and scholars. He commissioned works from leading figures such as Donatello, Fra Angelico, and Brunelleschi, contributing to the artistic and architectural transformation of Florence. One of his most famous commissions was the construction of the Florence Cathedral's dome by Brunelleschi, which became an architectural marvel of the Renaissance. The Medici family's influence extended beyond art and architecture. Cosimo's patronage of humanists and scholars helped establish Florence as a center for Renaissance intellectual life. He supported figures like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who contributed to the development of Renaissance philosophy and the humanist movement. The Medici's support of education, libraries, and the preservation of classical texts helped foster an intellectual environment that encouraged the study of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, shaping the course of Renaissance thought. Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, further solidified the family's influence in Florence. Lorenzo was not only a patron of the arts, but also a skilled diplomat and ruler. His patronage of artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Botticelli ensured that Florence remained at the center of artistic innovation during the High Renaissance. The Medici family's influence continued well into the 16th century, even after their political power waned, as they remained major patrons of the arts and played key roles in the cultural development of Europe. In sum, the Medici family's wealth, political influence, and patronage were instrumental in the rise of Florence as the cultural heart of the Renaissance. By supporting artists, scholars, and intellectuals, the Medici helped create an environment where creativity, innovation, and the exploration of new ideas could flourish, leaving a lasting legacy that shaped the Renaissance and beyond. Chapter 3, Renaissance Art, A New Vision. Renaissance art represents a dramatic shift from the medieval artistic traditions that preceded it, bringing forth a new vision of the world, the human form, and the relationship between the individual and the divine. Beginning in the 14th century, this transformative period in art was marked by an emphasis on realism, the use of perspective, and a celebration of human experience. The Renaissance artists sought to depict the world more accurately, not just as it was, but as it could be understood through observation, mathematics, and the revival of classical ideals. This new approach not only changed the way art was created, but also reshaped the way people saw the world. A fundamental innovation during the Renaissance was the development of perspective. Artists began to use linear perspective, a technique that created the illusion of depth on a flat surface. This allowed them to depict three-dimensional space in a two-dimensional medium more convincingly. The use of vanishing points, where parallel lines appear to converge, enabled artists to give their work a sense of realism and spatial organization that had never been achieved before. One of the earliest and most notable examples of this technique can be found in the work of Filippo Brunelleschi, who is credited with its development, and later in the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. Equally important was the Renaissance artists' focus on the human form. Influenced by the study of ancient Greek and Roman sculpture, artists sought to depict the human body with greater anatomical accuracy and expressiveness. Figures became more lifelike, with attention paid to muscle structure, proportion, and movement. Michelangelo's David, for example, is a stunning example of this new attention to human anatomy, depicting the biblical figure in a realistic and powerful manner. Renaissance artists, influenced by the ideals of humanism, began to see the human body as a subject worthy of both artistic and intellectual exploration. Renaissance art also saw the introduction of new materials and techniques, such as oil painting, which allowed for greater depth, richer colors, and more detailed textures. Artists like Jan van Eyck pioneered the use of oil paint, which became widely adopted during the period. This medium provided greater flexibility, allowing artists to work slowly and achieve a level of detail that was previously unattainable with tempera paints. The subjects of Renaissance art also expanded beyond the religious themes that dominated medieval art. While religious works remained important, artists began to experiment with secular themes such as portraits, landscapes, and mythological subjects. The Renaissance celebration of humanism also found expression in art, with many works exploring human emotion, individuality, and the natural world. In sum, Renaissance art represented a new vision, one that sought to understand and depict the world with greater accuracy, depth, and emotional resonance. Artists of the time fused classical ideals with innovative techniques, creating works that not only captured the beauty of the human form, but also explored new ways of representing the complexities of life, making the Renaissance an era of artistic transformation that laid the foundation for modern Western art. Key characteristics of Renaissance art. Renaissance art is renowned for its revolutionary approach to visual representation, marking a dramatic departure from the stylized, flat forms of medieval art. The period, spanning from the 14th to the 17th centuries, was characterized by a renewed interest in classical antiquity and a focus on humanism, which emphasized the potential of the individual. Artists of the Renaissance sought to create more naturalistic, lifelike representations of the world, incorporating innovative techniques that forever changed the course of art history. One of the defining characteristics of Renaissance art was the development and use of perspective. Before the Renaissance, art was primarily two-dimensional, with little regard for the illusion of depth or space. However, Renaissance artists pioneered the use of linear perspective, a technique that allowed them to represent three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. This mathematical system created the illusion of depth and made works of art appear more realistic. The use of perspective became a hallmark of Renaissance painting, seen in masterpieces such as Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper and Raphael's The School of Athens. The introduction of perspective marked a breakthrough in visual representation and allowed artists to depict space more convincingly. Another key feature of Renaissance art was the emphasis on realism and the accurate portrayal of the human form. Artists of the period closely studied human anatomy, often through dissections, to ensure their depictions of the body were lifelike and proportionate. This study of anatomy led to more naturalistic and expressive figures in art. Michelangelo's David, for example, showcases not only the beauty of the human body, but also conveys emotion and movement. The Renaissance focus on realism extended beyond the human figure to the depiction of nature, with artists seeking to capture the true colors, textures, and details of the world around them. The use of light and shadow, or chiaroscuro, was another defining characteristic of Renaissance art. Artists employed this technique to create a sense of depth and volume by using contrasting areas of light and dark. Chiaroscuro gave figures and objects a more three-dimensional quality and enhanced the dramatic impact of a composition. This technique is prominently seen in works by Caravaggio and Leonardo da Vinci, where the play of light and shadow creates depth and emphasizes the emotional intensity of the scene. Renaissance art also saw a rise in secular themes, as artists began to explore subjects beyond religious iconography. While religious works continued to dominate, artists also created portraits, landscapes, and scenes from classical mythology. This expansion of subject matter reflected the growing interest in humanism and the celebration of individual experience. In summary, Renaissance art is defined by its commitment to realism, the use of perspective, the study of human anatomy, and the exploration of light and shadow. These characteristics, alongside a shift towards secular themes and a renewed interest in classical antiquity, transformed art into a medium that sought to reflect the beauty, complexity, and depth of the human experience. The innovations of Renaissance artists laid the foundation for the artistic developments of the modern era. The birth of perspective in art. The birth of perspective in art during the Renaissance was one of the most significant innovations in the history of visual representation. It revolutionized the way artists depicted space, depth, and the human form on a flat surface, transforming painting and sculpture into more realistic and dynamic representations of the world. Prior to the Renaissance, art was largely two-dimensional, with little regard for the accurate depiction of space. However, the development of perspective allowed for the creation of the illusion of three-dimensional space, making artworks appear more lifelike and convincing. The origins of linear perspective can be traced back to Filippo Brunelleschi, an Italian architect and engineer who is credited with its invention in the early 15th century. Brunelleschi's experiments with perspective, particularly his method of using a mirror to reflect a scene, revealed how distant objects appear smaller and converge toward a single point on the horizon. This discovery laid the groundwork for the system of linear perspective that artists would later adopt. His findings were brought to public attention in Florence in 1415, where they sparked a dramatic shift in how artists approached the representation of space. The breakthrough in perspective was formalized and codified by Leon Battista Alberti, a humanist and architect, in his treatise On Painting, 1435. In this influential work, Alberti explained how artists could use a vanishing point on the horizon to create the illusion of depth in their compositions. By applying these mathematical principles, artists could depict the world in a more realistic manner, with objects appearing to recede into the background as they moved farther from the viewer. Alberti's theory not only provided a technical framework for artists, but also emphasized the intellectual aspect of art, linking artistic practice to mathematics and scientific observation. The use of perspective was quickly adopted by Renaissance artists, and it became a hallmark of the period. Masaccio, one of the early adopters, used perspective in his fresco The Holy Trinity, 1427, to create a realistic depiction of space in a church interior, with the figures appearing to occupy real, three-dimensional space. Leonardo da Vinci also mastered the technique, using it to create the illusion of depth in his paintings, such as The Last Supper, 1495 to 1498. By positioning the vanishing point at the center of the composition, Leonardo created a powerful focal point that drew the viewer's eye into the scene. The invention of perspective also influenced the way artists approached the depiction of human figures and landscapes. With a more accurate sense of depth, artists could now place figures within a convincing spatial context, creating compositions that felt more natural and grounded. The development of perspective was not only a technical advancement, but also a philosophical one, reflecting the Renaissance's shift toward an empirical, human-centered view of the world. In conclusion, the birth of perspective in Renaissance art was a transformative moment that changed the way artists represented the world. Through the work of figures like Brunelleschi and Alberti, artists were able to create more realistic and dynamic compositions, giving rise to a new era in art that emphasized depth, space, and human experience. Perspective became one of the defining features of Renaissance art, contributing to its enduring legacy and influence on future generations of artists. Famous early Renaissance artists Giotto, Masaccio, and Botticelli. The early Renaissance was marked by the emergence of artists who broke from the medieval traditions of flat, stylized figures, embracing a new realism and humanism that would define the era. Three artists who played crucial roles in shaping this shift were Giotto Bondone, Masaccio, and Sandro Botticelli, each contributing unique innovations that influenced the development of Renaissance art. Giotto di Bondone is often regarded as the father of Renaissance painting due to his revolutionary approach to the depiction of space, human emotion, and the natural world. Active during the late 13th and early 14th centuries, Giotto's frescoes marked a departure from the Byzantine-influenced art of the time, which tended to be flat and symbolic. His work was deeply rooted in the study of the human figure and the natural world. as seen in his famous fresco cycle in the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua. Here, Giotto introduced more realistic proportions and facial expressions, allowing his figures to convey emotion and drama. His use of perspective, though not fully developed, also began to suggest a more three-dimensional space. Giotto's innovations set the stage for future artists to explore greater realism in their work. Masaccio, working in the 15th century, is another key figure in the early Renaissance, known for his mastery of perspective and the human figure. His frescoes in the Brancacci Chapel in Florence are considered landmarks in the history of art. Masaccio was one of the first artists to fully integrate the principles of linear perspective into his work, giving his figures a sense of depth and volume that had not been achieved before. In his famous fresco, The Tribute Money, Masaccio used perspective to create a realistic space in which the figures interact with one another and the environment, enhancing the narrative. His careful study of human anatomy, combined with his use of light and shadow, chiaroscuro, allowed him to create figures that appeared more natural and lifelike, influencing generations of artists to come. Sandro Botticelli, another prominent artist of the early Renaissance, was known for his lyrical and delicate approach to painting. Active in Florence during the late 15th century, Botticelli's work blended classical mythology with Christian themes, reflecting the Renaissance fascination with ancient Greek and Roman culture. His most famous painting, The Birth of Venus, epitomizes his unique style, a graceful, idealized depiction of the goddess Venus emerging from the sea, rendered with flowing lines and soft colors. Botticelli's work was characterized by its use of elegant, elongated figures and ethereal compositions, which set him apart from other Renaissance artists focused more on realism. Though his style was less focused on the naturalism that characterized much of the Renaissance, Botticelli's work was deeply influential in shaping the aesthetic direction of Renaissance art, particularly in terms of beauty and idealism. In conclusion, Giotto, Masaccio, and Botticelli were pivotal in the development of Renaissance art, each contributing to the evolution of painting through their innovative approaches to realism, perspective, and the human figure. Giotto's emotional depth, Masaccio's mastery of perspective and anatomy, and Botticelli's idealized beauty all helped to lay the groundwork for the High Renaissance and left an enduring legacy in the history of Western art. The influence of science and anatomy on art. The Renaissance marked a period of intense intellectual curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge, where the realms of science and art began to intersect in revolutionary ways. One of the most significant influences of science on art during this time was the study of human anatomy. Renaissance artists, inspired by the principles of humanism and the renewed interest in the classical world, sought to understand the human body in a way that had never been done before. This scientific approach to anatomy allowed artists to create more realistic, lifelike depictions of the human figure, advancing the art of painting and sculpture in profound ways. The study of anatomy was central to the Renaissance artists' quest for realism. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo went to great lengths to study the human body, often conducting dissections of cadavers to understand the muscles, bones, and internal structures that formed the human shape. Leonardo, known for his meticulous attention to detail, produced a series of anatomical drawings based on his studies, capturing the intricacies of the human skeleton, muscles, and circulatory system. These studies not only advanced the knowledge of human anatomy, but also allowed Leonardo to apply this newfound understanding to his art, producing more natural and expressive human figures, as seen in his paintings like The Last Supper and his famous sketches of the Vitruvian Man, which emphasized proportion and symmetry in the human body. Michelangelo, too, was deeply influenced by his anatomical studies, and this is evident in his sculpture of David, where the artist meticulously rendered the muscles, veins, and posture of the human body. His understanding of human anatomy allowed him to depict the figure with extraordinary precision and dynamism. Michelangelo's anatomical knowledge helped him create not only accurate depictions of the body, but also figures that conveyed strength, movement, and emotion, transforming the way the human body was viewed in art. In addition to anatomy, the broader influence of science and observation also played a role in the advancement of Renaissance art. The development of perspective, for example, was rooted in mathematical principles and the scientific study of how the human eye perceives depth and space. Linear perspective, as developed by artists like Filippo Brunelleschi and Leonardo da Vinci, allowed for the accurate depiction of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface, revolutionizing painting and architecture. This scientific understanding of perspective gave artists the tools to create more immersive and realistic works of art, contributing to the overall transformation of visual representation during the Renaissance. In conclusion, the study of science and anatomy was integral to the development of Renaissance art. By understanding the mechanics of the human body and the principles of perspective, artists were able to produce works of extraordinary realism and emotional depth. This fusion of art and science helped to elevate the Renaissance to one of the most innovative and transformative periods in the history of Western art. The development of portraiture and landscape art. The Renaissance was a period of profound innovation in the visual arts, and two of the most significant developments were the rise of portraiture and landscape art. These forms of art evolved during the period as artists sought to represent not only religious and mythological subjects, but also the human experience, individual identity, and the natural world in new ways. Both portraiture and landscape art reflect the Renaissance's humanistic ideals, which focused on the individual, nature, and the pursuit of knowledge and beauty. Portraiture during the Renaissance represented a dramatic shift from the stylized, symbolic representations of people in medieval art. Artists began to focus on capturing the individual personality and character of their subjects, moving away from the traditional religious depictions that had dominated previous centuries. Portraits became a means for individuals to assert their social status, wealth, and intellectual achievements. The early Renaissance saw the development of a more naturalistic approach to portraiture, as artists sought to portray people in a more lifelike and relatable manner. One of the pioneers in Renaissance portraiture was Jan van Eyck, whose detailed, realistic paintings, such as the Arnolfini portrait, set a new standard for portraiture in the Northern Renaissance. His attention to the texture of fabrics, the reflection of light, and the use of symbolic details all contributed to a deeper, more nuanced portrayal of his subjects. In Italy, artists like Leonardo da Vinci elevated portraiture to new heights with works like the Mona Lisa, which captured not only the physical likeness of the subject, but also an elusive psychological depth, thanks to Leonardo's mastery of light and shadow and his ability to capture human expression. Portraiture became a key way for Renaissance artists to explore and depict human individuality, emotions, and intellect. At the same time, landscape art began to emerge as a distinct genre in Renaissance painting. While landscapes were often used as backdrops for religious or mythological scenes in earlier periods, Renaissance artists started to give more emphasis to nature itself, depicting it as a subject worthy of attention. The use of perspective and the growing interest in the accurate depiction of the natural world allowed artists to create landscapes that were both scientifically grounded and aesthetically pleasing. Leonardo da Vinci was one of the first to treat landscapes as an independent subject, incorporating detailed natural environments into his paintings. His Virgin of the Rocks, for example, features a carefully observed natural landscape in the background, which complements the spiritual narrative in the foreground. Albrecht Dürer, a German artist, further advanced the genre of landscape painting with works like his View of the Low Countries, where he captured the environment in stunning detail, showcasing his keen observation of the natural world. Dürer's landscapes marked a shift toward the appreciation of nature, not only as a backdrop for human activity, but as a worthy subject in itself. In conclusion, the development of portraiture and landscape art during the Renaissance reflects the period's intellectual and cultural transformations. Artists focused on the individual and the natural world, creating works that emphasized realism, psychological depth, and an appreciation for the environment. These innovations in art not only defined the Renaissance, but also set the stage for future artistic movements, further enhancing the role of art as a vehicle for personal expression and the exploration of the world around us. Chapter 4: The High Renaissance. The High Renaissance, which spanned from the late 15th to the early 16th century, represents the pinnacle of artistic achievement during the Renaissance period. It was a time of extraordinary innovation and refinement in art, marked by the work of some of the most celebrated figures in history, including Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. During this era, artists reached new heights of technical mastery, emotional depth, and intellectual exploration, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in art. The High Renaissance also saw the consolidation of many of the artistic principles and innovations developed earlier in the period, particularly in the fields of perspective, human anatomy, and the use of light and shadow. One of the most significant developments of the High Renaissance was the perfection of linear perspective, which artists had begun to experiment with during the early Renaissance. By this time, artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael had fully mastered the technique, allowing them to create works that seemed to inhabit three-dimensional space. In Da Vinci's The Last Supper, 1495 to 1498, for example, the use of perspective draws the viewer's eye toward the central figure of Christ, creating a dramatic focal point while giving the entire scene depth and spatial coherence. This use of perspective enhanced the emotional impact of the work and showcased the artist's ability to manipulate space and light. Michelangelo's contribution to the High Renaissance is equally monumental, particularly in the realm of sculpture. His David, completed in 1504, remains one of the most iconic sculptures of the period. Michelangelo's attention to anatomical detail, combined with his mastery of proportion, allowed him to create a figure of extraordinary naturalism and vitality. His work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, 1508 to 1512, further cemented his place in the High Renaissance, where his depiction of biblical figures, such as creation of Adam, is both physically and spiritually transformative. Michelangelo's ability to convey powerful human emotion through the human form set a new standard for art and became a model for future generations of artists. Raphael, known for his harmonious and idealized compositions, brought a sense of balance and clarity to High Renaissance art. His frescoes, particularly those in the Vatican rooms, such as the School of Athens, exemplify the intellectual spirit of the time. In this work, Raphael masterfully combined the classical ideals of the ancient Greeks with the humanistic ideals of the Renaissance, creating a space in which the great minds of the past, such as Plato and Aristotle, are depicted in a timeless dialogue. The High Renaissance was not only a period of artistic achievement, but also of intense intellectual and cultural exchange. The period was characterized by the flourishing of patronage, especially from the Catholic Church, which supported many of the era's most important works. The period also saw the rise of new artistic techniques, the continued study of classical antiquity, and an increased focus on the human condition, which would deeply influence the future of Western art. In conclusion, the High Renaissance was a period of artistic perfection, where the innovation and exploration of earlier Renaissance artists reached their zenith. The works of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael encapsulated the ideals of the time, a celebration of human potential, an embrace of classical learning, and a devotion to beauty, emotion, and intellectual inquiry. The High Renaissance set a standard that would influence generations of artists, making it one of the most revered periods in the history of Western art. Defining the High Renaissance. The High Renaissance, which lasted from the late 15th century into the early 16th century, represents the culmination of artistic achievement in the Renaissance period. It is characterized by an unparalleled mastery of technique, intellectual depth, and emotional expressiveness that would shape the future of Western art. The High Renaissance was a time when artists refined the principles of perspective, human anatomy, and the use of light and shadow, while simultaneously pushing the boundaries of what was possible in art. During this period, key figures such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael emerged, each contributing to the creation of masterpieces that are now considered the pinnacle of artistic expression. One of the defining features of the High Renaissance was the mastery of perspective. Artists had experimented with perspective in the early Renaissance, but by the High Renaissance, it was fully integrated into the artwork to create depth, realism, and a sense of space. The ability to depict three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface became a fundamental tool for artists, allowing them to create compositions that felt more lifelike and immersive. Leonardo da Vinci's work, particularly in The Last Supper, 1495 to 1498, showcases the sophisticated use of perspective, where the figures are arranged in a way that guides the viewer's eye toward the central figure of Christ, enhancing the emotional intensity of the scene. In the realm of sculpture, the High Renaissance saw the peak of human anatomical study and artistic expression. Michelangelo became the epitome of Renaissance ideals with his sculptures, most notably David, 1504, which exemplified a perfect understanding of human anatomy and proportion. Michelangelo's figures conveyed immense power, movement, and emotion, setting new standards for realism and naturalism in sculpture. His Sistine Chapel ceiling, 1508 to 1512, a monumental work in fresco, further demonstrated his genius, portraying biblical scenes with a dramatic use of light and shadow, as well as a focus on the human body that expressed both physical and emotional depth. Raphael, another key figure of the High Renaissance, brought harmony, clarity, and balance to his works. His frescoes, particularly in the Vatican rooms, such as the School of Athens, merged classical philosophy with Renaissance humanism, reflecting the intellectual climate of the time. Raphael's compositions were defined by a sense of grace and order, and his use of perspective, anatomical accuracy, and vibrant colors helped solidify his place among the greats of the era. The High Renaissance also marked the peak of patronage in art, particularly from the Catholic Church, which played a significant role in the creation of some of the most iconic works of the period. The Medici family, the papacy, and other wealthy patrons provided the financial support that allowed artists to produce these masterpieces, creating a flourishing cultural environment in cities like Florence, Rome, and Venice. In conclusion, the High Renaissance was a period of artistic perfection, defined by technical mastery, intellectual exploration, and a deep engagement with the human experience. It represents the zenith of Renaissance art, where artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael created timeless works that continue to influence and inspire generations of artists, setting the standard for artistic excellence that would resonate throughout history. Leonardo da Vinci, master of art and science. Leonardo da Vinci stands as one of the most iconic and influential figures in both the history of art and science. Born in 1452 in Vinci, Italy, Leonardo was a polymath whose curiosity and genius spanned across a vast array of disciplines. Though he is most famous for his art, particularly masterpieces such as the Mona Lisa and The Last Supper, his contributions to science, anatomy, engineering, and other fields were equally groundbreaking. Leonardo's ability to merge the worlds of art and science made him a unique figure of the Renaissance, embodying the era's ideals of intellectual exploration and discovery. In the realm of art, Leonardo's work is renowned for its technical innovation and emotional depth. His mastery of perspective, light, and shadow, combined with his unparalleled understanding of human anatomy, allowed him to create some of the most realistic and compelling figures in the history of painting. In The Last Supper, 1495 to 1498, Leonardo used linear perspective to create a dynamic composition, drawing the viewer's attention to the central figure of Christ. The use of light and shadow, chiaroscuro, in this work, along with the psychological depth of the figures, helped elevate religious art to a level of realism and human expression previously unseen. In the Mona Lisa, 1503 to 1506, Leonardo achieved a level of lifelike portrayal that was revolutionary. Her enigmatic smile, combined with the sfumato technique, soft transitions between light and shadow, gave her a sense of depth and realism that still captivates viewers today. However, Leonardo's genius extended far beyond the canvas. He had an insatiable curiosity about the world and a profound interest in understanding how things worked. His scientific studies were vast, ranging from the study of anatomy to engineering, botany, and optics. He meticulously dissected human cadavers to understand the structure of muscles, bones, and the vascular system, using this knowledge to improve the accuracy of his art. His notebooks, filled with sketches, diagrams, and observations, revealed a mind that was constantly probing the natural world. Many of his inventions, such as designs for flying machines and armored vehicles, were centuries ahead of their time, though they were never built in his lifetime. Leonardo's ability to blend art and science exemplified the Renaissance ideal of the universal man, someone whose intellectual curiosity and creativity knew no bounds. His work continues to inspire not only artists, but also scientists and engineers, and his legacy as a master of both art and science endures to this day. In Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance found its ideal figure, a visionary who seamlessly united the pursuit of beauty with the quest for knowledge. Michelangelo, sculptor, painter, and architect. Michelangelo Buonarroti, born in 1475 in Caprese, Italy, is widely regarded as one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, his work spanning sculpture, painting, and architecture. His artistic journey was defined by a relentless pursuit of perfection and a deep understanding of human anatomy, which enabled him to create some of the most powerful and enduring works in the history of Western art. Michelangelo's legacy is particularly marked by his masterpieces in sculpture, his awe-inspiring frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, and his contributions to the architectural beauty of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. As a sculptor, Michelangelo's talent was unparalleled. His most famous work, the David, 1504, is a perfect example of his mastery in capturing the human form. Carved from a single block of marble, the statue presents the biblical hero in a moment of intense concentration, radiating both physical power and emotional depth. The figure of David is not only a technical marvel, showing an extraordinary understanding of anatomy, but also a triumph of psychological expression. Michelangelo's ability to breathe life into marble, transforming it into flesh and muscle, set a new standard for sculpture that influenced generations of artists. His other works, such as the Pietà, 1499, which depicts the Virgin Mary holding the body of Christ, also showcase his extraordinary skill in rendering the human form with both tenderness and realism. In the realm of painting, Michelangelo's work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, 1508 to 1512, stands as one of the most iconic achievements in the history of art. Commissioned by Pope Julius II, the project involved painting over 12,000 square feet of the chapel's ceiling, and Michelangelo's frescoes depict scenes from the Bible, including the creation of Adam. His use of perspective, his bold compositions, and the emotive power of the figures demonstrate a mastery of the human body and expression. The famous image of God reaching out to touch the finger of Adam is not only one of the most recognized scenes in art, but also encapsulates Michelangelo's understanding of divine creation and the relationship between humanity and the divine. Michelangelo was also a renowned architect, and his work on St. Peter's Basilica in Rome is a testament to his versatility and genius. As chief architect of the basilica in the later years of his life, Michelangelo was instrumental in designing the iconic dome, which remains a symbol of Renaissance architecture. His approach to architecture was influenced by his deep knowledge of classical forms, but he also brought a sense of grandeur and emotional depth that reflected his artistic vision. In conclusion, Michelangelo's genius as a sculptor, painter, and architect reshaped the Renaissance and left a lasting imprint on the art world. His work not only defined the ideals of the period, but also transcended it, influencing generations of artists and continuing to inspire awe today. His commitment to artistic excellence and his relentless pursuit of perfection ensure that Michelangelo's legacy remains as relevant and influential as ever. Raphael, Harmony and Balance in Art. Raphael Sanzio, born in 1483 in Urbino, Italy, is often regarded as one of the greatest painters of the High Renaissance. Known for his mastery of composition, harmony, and balance, Raphael's work embodied the Renaissance ideals of proportion, clarity, and the seamless integration of classical themes with Christian subjects. Unlike his contemporaries Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, whose works often focused on intense emotional expression and dramatic energy, Raphael's style was characterized by a serene grace and a refined sense of order. His ability to create visual harmony in his compositions made him a beloved figure among Renaissance artists, patrons, and critics alike. One of Raphael's most celebrated contributions to the High Renaissance was his ability to fuse classical ideals with Christian themes, creating works that were both intellectual and accessible. His frescoes in the Vatican rooms, particularly in the Stanza della Segnatura, are some of his most iconic works. In the School of Athens, 1510 to 1511, Raphael brought together the greatest thinkers of ancient Greece and Rome in a harmonious gathering, including figures like Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. The painting is a perfect example of Raphael's balanced composition and the way he used perspective to guide the viewer's eye across the work. The figures are arranged in a symmetrical, yet dynamic way, with a perfect balance between the classical architecture and the figures themselves, which reflect Raphael's deep understanding of human proportion and anatomy. Raphael's use of light and color further enhanced the harmony in his works. His ability to create soft transitions between light and shadow, along with his mastery of color, made his figures appear lifelike while retaining an ethereal quality. In works like the Transfiguration, 1516 to 1520, his careful use of light emphasizes the spiritual transformation of Christ, while the composition of the work itself, juxtaposing the celestial and earthly realms, reflects his ability to blend the divine with the human. As a portraitist, Raphael's ability to capture the essence of an individual while maintaining a sense of idealized beauty was also notable. His portraits, such as those of Pope Julius II and Baldassare Castiglione, are studies in the balance between individuality and idealism, with a focus on serene expression and harmonious proportions. In conclusion, Raphael's genius lay in his ability to achieve harmony and balance in his art, blending the intellectual richness of the classical world with the spiritual depth of Christianity. His works are marked by an elegance and clarity that set a standard for Renaissance painting, and his influence on art extended well beyond his lifetime. Raphael's ability to create compositions that were both visually beautiful and intellectually profound ensures his place as one of the defining figures of the High Renaissance. The Vatican and the Sistine Chapel. The Vatican and the Sistine Chapel are two of the most iconic landmarks of the Renaissance and serve as a testament to the cultural, artistic, and religious significance of the period. Located in the heart of Rome, the Vatican is the center of the Roman Catholic Church, and the Sistine Chapel, a part of the Vatican complex, is renowned for its awe-inspiring frescoes, particularly those painted by Michelangelo. The history of the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel is deeply intertwined with the art and architecture of the Renaissance, and their influence on Western culture cannot be overstated. The Vatican, as the seat of the Catholic Church, has been a place of religious and political importance for centuries. It became a significant center of art and culture during the Renaissance, thanks to the patronage of several popes, including Pope Julius II, who commissioned some of the period's most famous works of art. The Vatican's role as a patron of the arts contributed to the flourishing of Renaissance culture, attracting artists, architects, and scholars from across Italy and Europe. The Vatican became a hub where classical ideas were revived and integrated with Christian themes, and the Church's vast collection of art and architecture reflects this blending of spiritual and intellectual pursuits. At the heart of the Vatican is the Sistine Chapel, originally built in the 15th century under Pope Sixtus IV, after whom it is named, and it is most famous for the monumental frescoes painted by Michelangelo between 1508 and 1512. The chapel's ceiling, covered with scenes from the Book of Genesis, is a masterpiece of Renaissance art. The creation of Adam, arguably the most famous image from the Sistine Chapel, depicts the moment when God reaches out to touch the finger of Adam, imparting life to him. This image captures the Renaissance ideals of humanism, with a focus on the human figure and its relationship to the divine. Michelangelo's work in the Sistine Chapel is celebrated not only for its technical brilliance, but also for its profound spiritual and philosophical depth. In addition to the ceiling, Michelangelo was later commissioned to paint the Last Judgment on the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel, a dramatic and powerful depiction of the final judgment and the division between the saved and the damned. The fresco reflects both the Renaissance's focus on the human body and its exploration of existential themes, blending classical aesthetics with Christian theology. The Vatican and the Sistine Chapel stand as symbols of the Renaissance's achievements in art, architecture, and culture. They reflect the period's reverence for classical antiquity, its emphasis on human potential, and its deep engagement with spiritual matters. The Sistine Chapel, with its breathtaking frescoes and the grandeur of its architectural design, continues to inspire awe and admiration, embodying the Renaissance's profound impact on the course of Western civilization. Chapter 5: Renaissance Architecture. Renaissance architecture marked a profound shift from the Gothic style of the Middle Ages, embracing the classical principles of ancient Greek and Roman design. The period, spanning roughly from the 14th to the 17th century, saw the revival of symmetry, proportion, and the use of classical elements such as columns, arches, and domes. The Renaissance architectural style sought to combine beauty, functionality, and harmony, reflecting the intellectual and cultural revival of classical antiquity. This architectural revolution was not only influenced by a return to ancient ideals, but also by the innovative spirit of the period, as architects and builders sought to create structures that represented both aesthetic elegance and the growing importance of humanism. One of the key features of Renaissance architecture was its emphasis on symmetry and proportion, influenced by classical Roman structures. Architects studied the works of Vitruvius, a Roman architect whose treatise, De Architectura, provided a guide for the ideal proportions and designs of buildings. These classical principles were applied to a wide range of structures, from churches and palaces to public buildings. The goal was to create a sense of order and balance, with every element of a building carefully designed to complement the whole. This can be seen in Filippo Brunelleschi's design of the Florence Cathedral's dome. Completed in 1434, the dome was an engineering marvel and one of the most significant achievements of Renaissance architecture. Brunelleschi's use of a double-shell structure and his mastery of perspective allowed him to create a dome that was both visually striking and structurally sound, embodying the Renaissance ideals of harmony and innovation. The use of the column was another defining feature of Renaissance architecture. The column, a classic element of Roman and Greek buildings, became a symbol of the period's embrace of classical ideals. Architects like Donato Bramante and Leon Battista Alberti incorporated columns into their designs, often in a more decorative and refined manner than in earlier periods. In Bramante's design for St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, the classical orders of columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, were integrated into the overall structure to create a sense of grandeur and symmetry. Palladianism, influenced by the work of the Venetian architect Andrea Palladio, also had a lasting impact on Renaissance architecture. Palladio's designs, particularly his use of the classical temple front in residential buildings, influenced architecture throughout Europe and beyond. His book, The Four Books of Architecture, became a key reference for architects in the centuries following the Renaissance. In conclusion, Renaissance architecture was a period of remarkable innovation and classical revival. Architects combined technical expertise with artistic vision to create buildings that were not only functional, but also reflective of the period's intellectual and cultural values. The architectural achievements of the Renaissance set the stage for later developments in Baroque and neoclassical design, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape of Europe and the world. Key characteristics of Renaissance architecture. Renaissance architecture, which flourished from the 14th to the 17th century, marked a dramatic departure from the Gothic style that preceded it, embracing the classical principles of ancient Greece and Rome. The architects of the Renaissance sought to revive the symmetry, proportion, and harmony of classical antiquity, blending these ideals with the intellectual and artistic innovations of the period. The key characteristics of Renaissance architecture include a focus on symmetry and proportion, the use of classical elements like columns and arches, the development of domes, and the integration of humanist ideals into architectural design. One of the most defining features of Renaissance architecture was its emphasis on symmetry and proportion. Inspired by the writings of the Roman architect Vitruvius, Renaissance architects aimed to create structures that were balanced and harmonious, with each element of a building contributing to a sense of overall order. Architects meticulously applied mathematical principles to ensure that the dimensions of buildings were in perfect proportion, creating an aesthetic balance that was both visually appealing and structurally sound. This commitment to proportion can be seen in the design of iconic buildings, such as St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, where proportions are carefully calculated to create a sense of unity and harmony. The use of classical elements was another hallmark of Renaissance architecture. Architects revived ancient Greek and Roman elements, including columns, arches, and domes, which were incorporated into both public and private buildings. The column, in particular, became a defining feature, with architects applying the classical orders, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, to their designs. The arch, another classical element, was used to create larger and more open spaces, as seen in Filippo Brunelleschi's design for the Florence Cathedral. The arch allowed for the construction of more expansive interiors, creating a sense of grandeur and lightness. Another key characteristic was the development of the dome. The dome became a symbol of Renaissance architectural achievement, representing both technical mastery and spiritual significance. Brunelleschi's dome for the Florence Cathedral, completed in 1434, was an engineering marvel and a triumph of Renaissance architecture. It combined classical inspiration with innovative techniques to create a structure that was both functional and awe-inspiring. Later, Michelangelo's dome for St. Peter's Basilica in Rome further exemplified the importance of the dome in Renaissance design. Lastly, Renaissance architecture was deeply influenced by humanist ideals. Buildings were designed not only to serve practical purposes, but also to reflect the intellectual and cultural aspirations of the time. The spaces were designed to encourage human interaction, contemplation, and a sense of beauty and order, reflecting the Renaissance's emphasis on human potential and achievement. In conclusion, Renaissance architecture was characterized by its return to classical principles, its emphasis on proportion and symmetry, and its innovative use of space and materials. These features not only defined the architecture of the period, but also laid the foundation for later architectural movements, such as Baroque and Neoclassicism. Filippo Brunelleschi and the Dome of Florence Cathedral. Filippo Brunelleschi, one of the most important figures of the Italian Renaissance, is best known for his revolutionary work in architecture, particularly for his design and construction of the Dome of the Florence Cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore. His achievement in building the dome was not only a triumph of engineering, but also a defining moment in Renaissance architecture, symbolizing both the artistic and intellectual spirit of the era. The Florence Cathedral, with its vast scale and intricate design, posed a unique challenge: how to build a dome that would cover the massive octagonal space without the need for external scaffolding. Brunelleschi's solution to this problem would change the course of architecture. In the early 15th century, the cathedral's construction had stalled due to the lack of a clear plan for the dome. Previous architects had proposed solutions, but none were feasible for the ambitious project. When Brunelleschi entered the scene in 1418, he proposed a bold and innovative design that was based on ancient Roman engineering principles. His design involved the use of a double-shell dome, a groundbreaking technique that allowed for both structural integrity and aesthetic elegance. The inner shell of the dome was made of brick, while the outer shell provided additional support and served as the visible part of the structure. This design not only addressed the technical challenge of constructing a dome of such a size, but also reduced the weight of the structure, preventing it from collapsing under its own weight. Brunelleschi's ability to solve the engineering challenges of the dome by his deep understanding of geometry and mathematics. He applied principles of linear perspective and devised new methods for lifting and placing materials, including the innovative use of machines to hoist bricks to great heights. His mastery of engineering and construction techniques allowed him to create a dome that was both functional and aesthetically stunning. The dome became a symbol of Florence's civic pride and the city's intellectual and artistic power during the Renaissance. Brunelleschi's dome is a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture, combining classical knowledge with innovative engineering. The Florence Cathedral's dome remains one of the largest and most admired domes in the world, and its construction had a profound influence on architecture in the Renaissance and beyond. It marked the beginning of a new era in architectural design, where the integration of art and engineering created structures that were both functional and visually spectacular. Brunelleschi's achievement remains a testament to the ingenuity and vision of Renaissance architects. Donato Bramante and St. Peter's Basilica. Donato Bramante, an Italian architect and a central figure of the High Renaissance, played a pivotal role in shaping the architectural landscape of Rome, most notably through his design for St. Peter's Basilica. His vision for the basilica became one of the most ambitious and influential architectural projects of the Renaissance, transforming the structure into a symbol of both religious and artistic achievement. Commissioned by Pope Julius II in 1506, the project aimed to create a church that would surpass all others in grandeur and beauty, reflecting the power and prestige of the Catholic Church. Bramante's design for St. Peter's Basilica was groundbreaking, as it introduced many of the key elements that would define Renaissance architecture. His plan featured a massive, centralized structure with a Greek cross layout, which emphasized symmetry, proportion, and a sense of harmony, values central to the Renaissance ideal. The design called for a vast dome to crown the church, a feature that would later become one of the defining characteristics of the basilica. Bramante's vision was inspired by ancient Roman architecture, particularly the Pantheon, whose iconic dome he sought to replicate and enhance on a far grander scale. Bramante's design for St. Peter's Basilica was revolutionary in its attempt to combine the grandeur of the ancient world with the Renaissance emphasis on humanism and spiritual experience. The centralized plan, with its harmonious proportions, was meant to evoke a sense of unity and divine order. Bramante also sought to create a structure that would inspire awe and reverence in those who entered, using architectural elements to convey the power of the church and the majesty of God. Although Bramante's original design was not fully realized during his lifetime, his contributions to the project were immense. After his death in 1514, other architects, including Michelangelo, Carlo Maderno, and Gianlorenzo Bernini, continued to work on the basilica, but Bramante's central vision remained the foundation for the structure. Michelangelo, for example, enhanced Bramante's design by refining the dome, which became the defining feature of the basilica and a symbol of Renaissance architectural achievement. In conclusion, Donato Bramante's design for St. Peter's Basilica marked a turning point in Renaissance architecture. His integration of classical elements with Renaissance principles, particularly in his use of symmetry and proportion, laid the groundwork for one of the most important architectural landmarks in history. St. Peter's Basilica remains a lasting testament to Bramante's genius and his role in shaping the architectural legacy of the Renaissance. The influence of Roman architecture. The influence of Roman architecture on the Renaissance was profound and far-reaching, shaping many of the period's most iconic structures. The architects and artists of the Renaissance looked back to the classical ideals of Roman design for inspiration, seeking to revive the grandeur, symmetry, and functionality that defined ancient Roman architecture. This revival was not only an aesthetic choice, but also an intellectual one, as Renaissance thinkers sought to reconnect with the ancient world and its ideals of balance, order, and rationality. The use of Roman architectural principles helped define the Renaissance as a period of both artistic achievement and intellectual exploration. One of the most notable aspects of Roman architecture that influenced the Renaissance was the use of the arch, which allowed for larger, more open spaces and more sophisticated structures. Roman architects mastered the arch, using it in a variety of contexts, from the construction of bridges and aqueducts to monumental buildings like the Pantheon and the Colosseum. The Pantheon, in particular, with its vast, unreinforced concrete dome, was a source of inspiration for Renaissance architects. The use of the arch, combined with the vault and dome, allowed for buildings that were not only structurally sound, but also aesthetically pleasing, creating a sense of grandeur and space. Renaissance architects, including Filippo Brunelleschi and Donato Bramante, drew directly from these Roman innovations, applying them to their own designs, particularly in the construction of churches and public buildings. The column, another key element of Roman architecture, also played a significant role in Renaissance design. Roman architecture featured columns in various styles, such as the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders, each with its own distinctive proportions and decoration. Renaissance architects adopted these orders, adapting them to their own designs to create a sense of classical harmony and order. The use of columns became a symbol of the Renaissance's connection to the ancient world, and they appeared prominently in buildings like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and Palladio's villas in Venice. The symmetry and proportion inherent in Roman architecture were seen as the ideal way to achieve balance in a building, reflecting the Renaissance's obsession with order and beauty. Roman architecture also influenced the Renaissance in its emphasis on public spaces and civic buildings. The Romans constructed large forums, basilicas, and other civic buildings that served as centers of social and political life. Renaissance architects sought to create similar structures that reflected the growing importance of urban centers and the rising influence of the merchant and banking classes. In particular, the design of public squares, such as Piazza del Campidoglio in Rome, was directly inspired by Roman examples, creating spaces that encouraged civic engagement and reflected the ideals of humanism. In conclusion, the influence of Roman architecture was central to the development of Renaissance design. Through the revival of Roman techniques, materials, and forms, Renaissance architects were able to create buildings that were not only functional, but also visually and intellectually rich, blending classical ideas with the humanist ideals of the time. The legacy of Roman architecture continues to be felt today, with its principles of balance, proportion, and grandeur still shaping architectural design across the world. The role of patrons in Renaissance architecture. The role of patrons in Renaissance architecture was crucial to the flourishing of the period's artistic and architectural achievements. The Renaissance, which spanned roughly from the 14th to the 17th century, was a time of great cultural and intellectual transformation. While the architects themselves were responsible for the design and construction of the buildings, it was the patrons, wealthy individuals, families, and institutions who provided the financial support and influence necessary to bring these grand projects to life. These patrons were often driven by a desire to showcase their power, prestige, and devotion to religious or civic causes, and their investments in architecture were a key factor in the development of the Renaissance. One of the most influential groups of patrons during the Renaissance were the Italian city-states and their ruling families, most notably the Medici family in Florence. The Medici were not only major patrons of the arts, but also key figures in architectural commissions. Through their support of architects such as Filippo Brunelleschi and Donato Bramante, the Medici helped to shape the skyline of Florence and Rome, ensuring that their cities would be seen as centers of power and culture. For instance, the Medici commissioned the construction of the Medici Chapel in Florence, which became a symbol of their wealth and influence. Similarly, the Pope and the Catholic Church played a central role in commissioning religious buildings during the Renaissance. The construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, overseen by various papal patrons, was one of the most significant architectural projects of the time, and it remains a symbol of the Church's grandeur and spiritual authority. Patrons were also instrumental in commissioning civic buildings and public spaces that would serve to enhance the cultural and intellectual life of their cities. For example, in Florence, the Piazza del Duomo and the Piazza della Signoria were built with the backing of influential families and civic institutions, serving both as physical expressions of power and as spaces for public engagement. In Venice, the Piazza San Marco and the Doge's Palace were constructed to reflect the wealth and political power of the Venetian Republic. These spaces and buildings became symbols of the city's prestige and the civic pride of its citizens. The support of patrons was also integral to the spread of architectural ideas across Europe. Wealthy patrons from different regions commissioned Renaissance architects to design structures that reflected the classical ideals of the time, resulting in the spread of Renaissance architectural principles from Italy to other parts of Europe, including France, Spain, and England. Patrons in these regions sought to bring the intellectual and artistic achievements of the Renaissance to their own cities, further embedding Renaissance architecture into the cultural fabric of Europe. In conclusion, patrons played an essential role in the development of Renaissance architecture. Their financial support and cultural influence allowed architects to push the boundaries of design, creating buildings that reflected the ideals of the Renaissance and helped to shape the political, religious, and civic identity of the period. Without the patronage of wealthy individuals, families, and institutions, much of the remarkable architecture of the Renaissance would not have been possible. Chapter 6, Renaissance Sculpture. Renaissance sculpture represents a profound transformation in the history of art, as artists return to the classical ideals of ancient Greece and Rome while pushing the boundaries of creativity, human expression, and technical mastery. The period, spanning from the 14th to the 17th century, saw a revival of interest in the human form and an emphasis on naturalism, proportion, and anatomical accuracy. Sculptors of the Renaissance not only focused on replicating the idealized forms of classical antiquity, but also explored the emotional depth, movement, and individuality of their subjects. The Renaissance was a time of great experimentation in sculpture, and one of the most important figures of the period was Donatello, whose work exemplified the era's return to classical ideals. Donatello's David, circa 1440s, is one of the most significant examples of early Renaissance sculpture. Unlike the more rigid, stylized depictions of the biblical hero in medieval art, Donatello's David is a lively, naturalistic figure, capturing the youthful energy and physicality of the human body. The statue's contrapposto stance, with the weight shifted onto one leg, reflects a deep understanding of human movement and anatomy, making the figure appear more lifelike than earlier representations. Donatello's ability to express the human form in a realistic and emotional way set a new standard for Renaissance sculptors. Another key figure in Renaissance sculpture was Michelangelo, whose influence on the period cannot be overstated. Michelangelo's work, especially his David, 1504, took the exploration of the human body to new heights. Carved from a single block of marble, Michelangelo's David is an embodiment of physical perfection and emotional intensity. The sculpture's anatomical precision, combined with its dynamic, heroic posture, captures the essence of the Renaissance's celebration of human potential. Michelangelo's figures, often imbued with a sense of movement and vitality, became the standard for Renaissance sculpture and would influence generations of artists. In addition to Donatello and Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci also contributed to the development of Renaissance sculpture. Though Leonardo is primarily known for his painting, his studies of human anatomy and his sketches of sculptures demonstrate his deep understanding of the human body. His interest in sculpture can be seen in his preparatory drawings for various works, which influenced later sculptors, including his own work on the unfinished sculpture of St. John the Baptist. Renaissance sculpture also extended beyond religious figures and mythological subjects to include portraiture and works that depicted everyday human experiences. Sculptors like Lorenzo Ghiberti, whose Gates of Paradise for the Florence Baptistery exemplify the beauty and precision of Renaissance relief sculpture, expanded the scope of sculpture during the period, depicting scenes from the Bible with a new sense of depth and emotion. In conclusion, Renaissance sculpture marked a profound shift in the representation of the human form. The study of anatomy, the exploration of emotion, and the revival of classical techniques transformed sculpture into a medium that celebrated human beauty, power, and individuality. Sculptors like Donatello, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci set new standards in artistic achievement, and their work continues to be admired for its technical excellence and emotional depth. Rediscovery of classical techniques. The rediscovery of classical techniques during the Renaissance was a pivotal turning point in the history of art and architecture. After centuries of medieval art, which was heavily influenced by religious themes and abstract forms, the Renaissance marked a return to the study and emulation of ancient Greek and Roman principles. Artists, architects, and scholars began to look to classical antiquity for inspiration, seeking to revive the ideals of proportion, symmetry, and naturalism that characterized the art and architecture of the ancient world. This revival was not merely an aesthetic choice, but a philosophical and intellectual pursuit, as the Renaissance was driven by the desire to reconnect with the wisdom and cultural achievements of ancient civilizations. One of the key elements of classical techniques that was rediscovered was the study of human anatomy. Greek and Roman artists had a deep understanding of the human body, and Renaissance artists, such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, studied classical sculptures and anatomical texts to better understand the proportions and movement of the human form. The focus on realism and the accurate depiction of human anatomy became a hallmark of Renaissance art. Michelangelo's David, for example, is a prime example of this study. Carved from marble, the statue exemplifies idealized human proportions and demonstrates the artist's understanding of the muscles and structure of the body, breathing life into the stone. Perspective, a classical innovation that had been lost during the Middle Ages, was also revived during the Renaissance. The ancient Greeks and Romans used perspective to create depth and space in their artwork, but it was not fully understood or applied in the Middle Ages. Filippo Brunelleschi, an Italian architect, is credited with developing linear perspective in the early 15th century, which allowed artists to depict three-dimensional space on a flat surface. This technique was pivotal in works like Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, where the use of perspective draws the viewer's eye toward the central figure of Christ, creating a sense of depth and realism. Another significant rediscovery was the use of the column and other architectural elements from ancient Rome. Renaissance architects, such as Donato Bramante and Andrea Palladio, adopted the classical orders of columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, and integrated them into their designs. The Vitruvian principles of symmetry and proportion, as outlined by the Roman architect Vitruvius, became essential guides for Renaissance builders, allowing them to create structures that were balanced and harmonious. The rediscovery of these classical techniques transformed art and architecture during the Renaissance. By studying and adopting the methods of the ancients, artists and architects were able to create works that not only emulated the beauty and harmony of classical antiquity, but also incorporated a new understanding of the human condition. The revival of classical principles laid the foundation for the artistic and intellectual achievements of the Renaissance, shaping the future of Western art and architecture. Donatello's revolutionary contributions. Donatello di Niccolò di Beto Bardi, commonly known as Donatello, was one of the most innovative and influential sculptors of the Renaissance. His contributions to the art of sculpture marked a dramatic shift from the rigid, stylized forms of the medieval period to a more naturalistic and human-centered approach that would define Renaissance art. Donatello's groundbreaking work not only revived classical principles of proportion and anatomy, but also introduced new techniques and expressive possibilities that set the stage for future generations of artists. One of Donatello's most revolutionary contributions was his ability to revive the classical nude in a way that had not been seen since ancient times. In his early work, St. George, circa 1415, Donatello demonstrated a mastery of the human form, capturing the saint in a naturalistic stance and rendering him with a sense of movement and anatomical precision. The figure was groundbreaking because it departed from the stiff, stylized representations of the human body that characterized medieval sculpture. Donatello's emphasis on accurate anatomy and the fluidity of the human body marked a return to the classical ideals of ancient Greek and Roman art. However, Donatello's most famous and influential work is his David, circa 1440s, a life-size bronze statue that became an icon of Renaissance art. Unlike previous depictions of David, which were often rigid and symbolic, Donatello's David is dynamic and full of life. The statue is notable for its portrayal of the youthful biblical hero in a relaxed contrapposto stance, a pose that evokes both grace and naturalism. The delicate rendering of David's body, combined with his confident expression, conveys a sense of individuality and psychological depth that was unprecedented in sculpture at the time. This work was not only a technical marvel, but also an exploration of humanism, as it captured the potential of the individual and celebrated the beauty of the human form. Another significant contribution by Donatello was his use of relief sculpture. His innovative work in relief, particularly in the Gates of Paradise for the Baptistery of Florence, marked a turning point in the development of this art form. The reliefs were incredibly detailed, with figures that appeared to emerge from the surface in three-dimensional space. Donatello's mastery of perspective and depth in these works allowed him to create a sense of realism that had never been achieved before. Donatello's revolutionary approach to sculpture influenced not only his contemporaries, but also generations of artists who followed. His commitment to the accurate representation of the human body, his exploration of emotion and individual expression, and his innovative use of materials and techniques made him one of the most important figures in the history of Renaissance art. Through his contributions, Donatello helped to lay the foundation for the artistic achievements of the High Renaissance and beyond. Michelangelo's David and the creation of the human form. Michelangelo's David, 1504, is one of the most iconic and celebrated sculptures in the history of art, renowned not only for its technical mastery, but also for its profound representation of human form and emotion. Carved from a single block of marble, David exemplifies Michelangelo's unparalleled skill in capturing the human body in its most idealized yet deeply emotional state. This statue is often seen as the epitome of Renaissance ideals, particularly the period's emphasis on the beauty of the human form, the study of anatomy, and the embodiment of human potential. Michelangelo's David is groundbreaking in its naturalism, marking a dramatic departure from earlier depictions of biblical figures. Unlike the more conventional representations of David as a youthful, serene hero, Michelangelo's version presents him as a mature, muscular figure poised for action. His body, though idealized, displays an extraordinary level of anatomical precision, from the taut muscles of his arms and legs to the subtle tension in his posture. The figure's contrapposto stance, where the weight is shifted onto one leg, creates a dynamic sense of movement, bringing David to life in a way that was revolutionary at the time. What sets Michelangelo's David apart from previous sculptures is not only the technical execution of the body, but the psychological depth embedded within the figure. David's expression is one of intense concentration and determination, reflecting the moment before he faces the giant Goliath. This shift from the serene to the expressive marks a significant departure from earlier Renaissance depictions, where figures were often static or idealized in a way that distanced them from real human experience. Michelangelo's David, by contrast, encapsulates the human experience of inner struggle, courage, and resolve. The tension in David's body, his clenched fist, the slight furrow of his brow, captures both the physical and emotional preparation for the monumental task ahead. Michelangelo's intimate understanding of human anatomy allowed him to sculpt the figure with such detail and precision that David's body seems to embody not only strength, but a deep sense of life. The muscles are rendered with remarkable accuracy, showing a profound understanding of the human form. Michelangelo studied anatomy extensively, even dissecting cadavers to ensure that every sinew, bone, and muscle was represented with the utmost realism. This knowledge enabled him to create a figure that was both idealized in its beauty and deeply rooted in the scientific understanding of the human body. In conclusion, Michelangelo's David stands as a monumental achievement in the history of sculpture. It is not only a technical marvel, but also a powerful symbol of human potential, combining an idealized representation of the human body with an intense emotional expression that connects the viewer to the deeper themes of struggle, strength, and individuality. Through this work, Michelangelo established a new standard for sculpture and cemented his legacy as one of the greatest artists in history. The evolution of sculpture from the early to the High Renaissance. The evolution of sculpture from the early to the High Renaissance marks a dramatic shift in the way artists approached the human figure, space, and emotion. Early Renaissance sculpture, influenced by the transition from medieval to classical ideals, focused primarily on reviving the techniques and principles of ancient Greek and Roman art, but it was in the High Renaissance that sculpture truly reached its apex. This evolution saw a gradual move from more rigid, stylized representations to dynamic, naturalistic forms that captured both the anatomical precision of the human body and the depth of human emotion. In the early Renaissance, Donatello was one of the key figures in pushing sculpture towards a more naturalistic representation of the human form. His David, c. 1440s, one of the first freestanding nude statues since antiquity, marked a shift away from the more abstract and stylized figures of the medieval period. Donatello's David was a breakthrough in terms of proportion and pose, as it was created with a sense of anatomical accuracy and a relaxed contrapposto stance that evoked the grace and balance of classical sculpture. Donatello's work, though still adhering to some medieval conventions, showed a deepening understanding of human anatomy and a move towards greater realism. As the Renaissance progressed into the High Renaissance, Michelangelo would take these developments even further with his monumental sculptures, such as David, 1504. Michelangelo's approach to the human figure was both revolutionary and idealized. His mastery of human anatomy, honed through extensive study of the human body, allowed him to create figures with a dynamic sense of energy and lifelike precision. Michelangelo's David, with its tense posture and intense expression, conveyed not only the physical beauty of the human body, but also an emotional depth that was rarely seen in earlier sculptures. The figure appears to be on the verge of action, with a palpable sense of tension and determination. This shift towards emotional depth and naturalism reached its fullest expression in the works of Michelangelo and Raphael during the High Renaissance. Sculptors began to incorporate the psychological and emotional aspects of their subjects, as seen in Michelangelo's Pietà, 1499, which depicts the Virgin Mary holding the body of Christ in a moment of sorrow. The graceful portrayal of the human figure in High Renaissance sculpture was no longer just about physical accuracy, but also about capturing human emotion and the complexities of the human experience. In conclusion, the evolution of sculpture from the early to the High Renaissance reflects a movement towards greater naturalism, anatomical accuracy, and emotional depth. The transition was driven by a renewed interest in classical ideals, the study of the human body, and a desire to portray the full range of human experience. Through artists like Donatello and Michelangelo, Renaissance sculpture became not only a technical achievement, but also a powerful expression of humanity's intellectual, artistic, and emotional aspirations. The role of sculpture in religious and civic life. Sculpture during the Renaissance played a significant role in both religious and civic life, reflecting the cultural, political, and spiritual aspirations of the time. In a period where art was seen not only as an aesthetic pursuit, but also as a means of communicating moral, religious, and civic values, sculpture became a powerful tool for shaping public consciousness. From religious commissions in churches to civic monuments in town squares, Renaissance sculpture served to inspire, educate, and elevate society by giving physical form to the ideals of the time. In the realm of religion, sculpture was central to the decoration of churches, cathedrals, and other sacred spaces. The Catholic Church, as a major patron of the arts during the Renaissance, commissioned numerous sculptures that depicted biblical stories, saints, and other religious themes. These works were intended to inspire devotion, reinforce religious teachings, and reflect the glory of God. One of the most iconic religious sculptures of the Renaissance is Michelangelo's Pietà, 1499, which shows the Virgin Mary cradling the lifeless body of Christ. The statue not only exhibits Michelangelo's mastery of human anatomy, but also conveys profound emotional depth, capturing the sorrow and compassion of the scene. Such works help make spiritual themes more tangible for viewers, conveying divine presence and human emotion in a way that words alone could not. Sculpture also played a prominent role in civic life, particularly in the form of public monuments, statues, and commemorative works that celebrated the achievements of leaders, patrons, and entire communities. In Florence, for example, The David by Donatello, c. 1440s, was not only a biblical figure, but also a symbol of the city's independence and civic pride. As a representation of a youthful, confident David defeating the giant Goliath, it embodied the ideals of Florence as a small republic standing up against larger, more powerful states. Similarly, public sculptures like equestrian statues were used to honor prominent civic leaders. The equestrian statue of Gattamelata, created by Donatello, was commissioned to celebrate the military achievements of the Venetian general Erasmo da Narni. These statues were not only works of art, but also tools for reinforcing civic identity and values, serving as reminders of the virtues and historical accomplishments of the community. In both religious and civic contexts, sculpture became a means of immortalizing ideals, whether religious devotion, civic pride, or individual achievement. Through the emotional expressiveness and technical mastery of Renaissance sculptors like Donatello, Michelangelo, and others, sculpture transcended mere decoration, becoming an integral part of both public and spiritual life. The fusion of art and society in this way helped shape the cultural landscape of the Renaissance and continues to influence the way art is used in public spaces today. Chapter 7: The Role of Literature and Philosophy in the Renaissance. The Renaissance was not only a period of remarkable artistic and architectural achievement, but also a time of profound intellectual exploration and cultural rebirth. At the heart of this transformation was the rediscovery and revival of ancient Greek and Roman literature and philosophy, which played a central role in shaping the intellectual climate of the period. This era saw a resurgence of interest in classical texts, humanism, and the relationship between the individual and society, all of which were expressed through the literature and philosophical works of the time. Writers and thinkers of the Renaissance sought to reconnect with the intellectual legacy of antiquity, leading to a flourishing of literature, philosophy, and critical thought that would lay the foundation for the modern world. One of the central ideas that defined the Renaissance was humanism, a philosophical movement that emphasized the value and agency of human beings. Humanists believed that by studying the classical works of ancient Greece and Rome, they could gain insight into human nature, ethics, and the potential for individual achievement. Humanism sought to reconcile classical knowledge with Christian values, advocating for the pursuit of knowledge, wisdom, and virtue as means to improve society. Leading figures like Petrarch, often considered the father of humanism, and Giovanni Boccaccio championed the study of ancient texts and the cultivation of a well-rounded education. Petrarch's sonnets and Boccaccio's Decameron showcased a shift away from medieval scholasticism and religious dogma, exploring themes of love, human emotion, and the complexities of life. In addition to humanism, Renaissance literature was heavily influenced by the rediscovery of Greek and Roman philosophers, whose works provided intellectual guidance for thinkers of the period. Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and others became central figures in Renaissance thought. Marsilio Ficino, a leading Renaissance philosopher, translated Plato's works into Latin, making them accessible to a wider audience and fostering an intellectual movement that sought to apply ancient ideas to contemporary issues. Similarly, Niccolò Machiavelli's writings, particularly The Prince, 1513, explored political philosophy and the nature of power. His work had a lasting impact on political thought as it emphasized the practical realities of governance over idealistic visions, and his exploration of human nature and statecraft continues to influence modern political theory. Renaissance literature also saw the development of new literary forms, such as the essay, novel, and drama, which were shaped by the evolving intellectual climate. Writers like Francesco Guicciardini and Michel de Montaigne wrote introspective essays that explored the human experience, while William Shakespeare, who emerged at the end of the Renaissance, revolutionized drama with his complex portrayals of human nature and political power. In conclusion, literature and philosophy were integral to the cultural and intellectual revival of the Renaissance. Through the rediscovery of classical texts and the rise of humanism, Renaissance writers and thinkers sought to understand the nature of humanity and its potential. The period's literature and philosophy not only reflected the human experience, but also laid the groundwork for the modern intellectual tradition, influencing countless fields of study, from politics and ethics to literature and art. Humanism and the revival of classical texts. Humanism, one of the most defining intellectual movements of the Renaissance, was fundamentally connected to the revival of classical texts. Emerging during the 14th century, humanism sought to rediscover, preserve, and study the works of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, writers, and scholars. Humanists believed that the classical past held valuable insights into human nature, ethics, and the potential for personal and societal improvement. This revival of classical antiquity laid the groundwork for a transformation in thought, art, and culture, as humanists advocated for a renewed focus on reason, individual achievement, and the exploration of human experience. The revival of classical texts was crucial to the development of Renaissance humanism. Ancient Greek and Roman works, particularly those of philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Seneca, became central to the intellectual life of the period. Humanists viewed these texts as guides for understanding both the natural world and human society, using them to challenge the scholasticism and religious dogma that dominated the Middle Ages. The study of classical literature was seen as a way to cultivate the mind, leading to a more virtuous and well-rounded individual, capable of contributing to society. Petrarch, often called the father of humanism, was one of the first to actively seek out and preserve ancient manuscripts, recognizing the value of classical thought in shaping the future of European culture. His efforts to revive classical Latin literature became a cornerstone of the humanist movement, influencing generations of scholars who followed. The humanist movement was also propelled by the work of Erasmus of Rotterdam, who translated many classical works into Latin and emphasized the importance of returning to the original texts, free from medieval interpretations. His critical editions of the Bible, for example, aimed to return to the sources of Christian teachings, using classical methods of textual analysis. Similarly, Marsilio Ficino, a leading philosopher and translator, played a crucial role in bringing the works of Plato to the Latin-speaking world, ensuring that the ideas of ancient Greek philosophers became foundational to Renaissance thought. The humanist focus on classical texts also had a profound impact on literature, art, and education. Writers like Giovanni Boccaccio and Dante Alighieri drew inspiration from classical models, integrating mythological and historical references into their works. In art, the revival of classical ideals of proportion, symmetry, and humanism profoundly influenced figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. In conclusion, humanism and the revival of classical texts were central to the intellectual, cultural, and artistic transformation of the Renaissance. By re-engaging with the ideas of the ancients, humanists sought to create a more enlightened society, one that valued the potential of the individual, the study of the natural world, and the exploration of human experience. The rediscovery of classical texts reshaped the course of history, influencing Western thought and laying the foundation for the modern intellectual tradition. Key figures in Renaissance literature: Petrarch, Dante, and Erasmus. The Renaissance was not only a period of artistic and architectural achievement, but also a time of immense literary innovation. Three key figures who shaped Renaissance literature were Petrarch, Dante, and Erasmus. Their works helped define the intellectual climate of the period, contributing to the revival of classical ideals, the exploration of humanism, and the emergence of new literary forms that would have a lasting impact on Western literature. Petrarch, often considered the father of humanism, was pivotal in the revival of classical Latin literature and the promotion of humanist ideals. His poetry, particularly his canzoniere, a collection of sonnets dedicated to his beloved Laura, explored themes of love, personal reflection, and the human experience. Petrarch's humanist philosophy focused on the importance of the individual and the intellectual value of studying ancient texts. He sought to revive the literary works of the classical world, particularly the writings of Cicero, Virgil, and Horace, emphasizing the moral and intellectual teachings of these authors. Petrarch's efforts to rediscover and preserve ancient manuscripts laid the groundwork for Renaissance scholars and helped to foster a renewed interest in classical learning that would permeate all areas of culture during the period. Dante Alighieri, while often considered a precursor to the Renaissance, had a profound influence on Renaissance literature, particularly through his epic poem, The Divine Comedy. Written in the early 14th century, the work depicted Dante's journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise, combining medieval Christian theology with classical influences. Dante's use of the vernacular in his writings, as opposed to Latin, made literature more accessible to a wider audience and helped establish the Italian language as a literary medium. The Divine Comedy's exploration of human nature, morality, and the afterlife resonated deeply with Renaissance thinkers, particularly those concerned with the individual's relationship to the divine and the human condition. Erasmus, a Dutch scholar and theologian, was one of the most influential intellectuals of the Renaissance. His works, including In Praise of Folly, 1509, which humorously critiqued the social and religious practices of the time, exemplified the humanist spirit. Erasmus was a scholar of classical texts, and his editions of the Greek New Testament and other works contributed to the development of Renaissance scholarship. His advocacy for a return to original sources, free from medieval interpretations, helped shape the course of Renaissance thought and had a profound influence on the Reformation and the development of modern biblical scholarship. In conclusion, Petrarch, Dante, and Erasmus were instrumental in shaping Renaissance literature. Their works revived classical themes, promoted humanist ideals, and contributed to the development of new literary forms. Their influence continued to resonate throughout the Renaissance and beyond, leaving a legacy that transformed Western literature and intellectual thought. Niccolò Machiavelli and political thought. Niccolò Machiavelli, an Italian diplomat, philosopher, and historian, is one of the most influential figures in the history of political thought. His writings, particularly The Prince, 1513, which became a foundational text in the field of political science, had a profound impact on Renaissance politics and beyond. Machiavelli's ideas diverged sharply from the traditional notions of moral philosophy and governance, offering a pragmatic and at times controversial approach to power and statecraft. Machiavelli's work emerged during a time of intense political instability in Italy, where the Italian city-states were often embroiled in conflict and foreign intervention. His experience as a diplomat in Florence, coupled with his observations of the political struggles of his time, shaped his views on leadership and power. The Prince, written as advice for rulers, presented an unvarnished view of politics, arguing that rulers should prioritize the preservation of the state above all else. Unlike many political theorists of the time, Machiavelli did not concern himself with the idealistic notions of justice or morality. Instead, he focused on the realpolitik of governance, emphasizing that rulers must be willing to act ruthlessly and without hesitation if necessary. A key element of Machiavelli's political philosophy is the concept of the virtù, a term that encapsulates qualities such as decisiveness, strength, and adaptability in a ruler. For Machiavelli, virtù did not refer to traditional moral virtues, but rather to a ruler's ability to navigate the complexities of power, fortune, and circumstance. He argued that a successful ruler must possess the skill to manipulate events to their advantage, understanding when to be cruel or merciful, bold or cautious, depending on the situation. In this sense, Machiavelli's approach to leadership was deeply pragmatic, rooted in the understanding that political power often requires morally ambiguous actions. Machiavelli's most famous assertion, that the ends justify the means, has often been misunderstood or mischaracterized. He did not advocate for unrestrained tyranny, but instead believed that a ruler's primary responsibility was to maintain stability and security within their state. His ideas encouraged rulers to balance the use of force with diplomacy, to control the narrative surrounding their reign, and to be both feared and loved, though he argued that if a ruler had to choose, it was safer to be feared than loved. Machiavelli's political thought was groundbreaking in its rejection of idealism and its emphasis on pragmatic statecraft. His ideas on power, leadership, and the nature of political life laid the foundation for later political theorists and continue to influence political thought today. His work sparked debates about ethics, power, and governance, marking a significant shift in the way politics was understood during the Renaissance and beyond. The rise of vernacular literature. The rise of vernacular literature during the Renaissance marked a profound shift in the way literature was produced, consumed, and understood. Before the Renaissance, most literary works were written in Latin, the language of the church, scholars, and the educated elite. However, as the Renaissance progressed, there was a growing recognition of the importance of writing in the vernacular languages, those spoken by ordinary people. This shift was driven by a variety of factors, including the increasing desire for broader access to literature, the influence of humanism, and the rise of the middle class. One of the earliest and most influential examples of vernacular literature in the Renaissance was Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, written in Tuscan Italian in the early 14th century. Although it predates the height of the Renaissance, Dante's work was foundational in establishing the idea that important literary works could be written in the common tongue. The Divine Comedy, with its vivid depiction of the afterlife, resonated with a wide audience, as it made complex theological concepts more accessible and emotionally compelling. Dante's choice to write in the vernacular rather than in Latin helped to elevate the Tuscan dialect, and his work became a symbol of Italy's emerging national identity. Another key figure in the rise of vernacular literature was Geoffrey Chaucer, whose Canterbury Tales, written in Middle English, also bridged the gap between the educated elite and the common people. Chaucer's use of the vernacular allowed him to explore a wide range of social classes and human experiences, bringing diverse voices into his work. His vivid portrayals of medieval society, combined with humor and satire, made the Canterbury Tales not only accessible but also immensely popular. Chaucer's success helped solidify the use of English in literary works, encouraging other writers to follow his example. The printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, played a crucial role in the spread of vernacular literature. The press made books more affordable and widely available, allowing works written in the vernacular to reach a much larger audience than ever before. Authors like Erasmus and Martin Luther took advantage of the printing press to disseminate their ideas in the vernacular, making their works accessible to the masses and contributing to the Protestant Reformation and the rise of a more literate public. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the rise of vernacular literature had become a key feature of Renaissance culture. Writers began to see their languages as worthy of literary expression, using them to explore both secular and religious themes. This shift democratized literature, expanding its reach and helping to foster the development of national cultures and identities. The rise of vernacular literature also laid the groundwork for the later flourishing of European literature, as writers such as Shakespeare in England and Cervantes in Spain would continue to shape and elevate their respective languages in the centuries to come. The influence of Renaissance thought on modern philosophy. The Renaissance, a period of profound intellectual and cultural rebirth, had a lasting influence on the development of modern philosophy. During this time, thinkers rediscovered and reinterpreted classical Greek and Roman texts, integrating ancient ideas with contemporary concerns and laying the groundwork for the philosophical advancements of the Enlightenment and beyond. Renaissance humanism, with its focus on the value of the individual and the potential for human achievement, played a pivotal role in shaping the trajectory of Western philosophy, influencing key figures like Descartes, Locke, and Hume, among others. Central to the Renaissance was the philosophy of humanism, which emphasized the dignity, freedom, and rationality of the individual. Humanists believed that individuals were capable of reason and self-determination, and that through education, humans could reach their full potential. This focus on human agency and the importance of education led to a new understanding of human nature, one that rejected the medieval view of humanity as inherently flawed, and instead championed the idea of human beings as capable of great achievement. Philosophers like Petrarch and Erasmus believed that by studying the classics, individuals could better understand their place in the world and their relationship to society, the divine, and the natural world. This emphasis on human potential would later inspire modern concepts of individual rights, autonomy, and human progress. Renaissance thought also laid the foundation for the development of empiricism and scientific inquiry. Figures like Niccolò Machiavelli, Francis Bacon, and Leonardo da Vinci sought to explore the natural world through observation, experimentation, and reason. Bacon, for instance, argued for a systematic approach to scientific inquiry, promoting the use of inductive reasoning to gather knowledge and test hypotheses. This approach would become a central tenet of modern scientific methodology, influencing the rise of empirical philosophy and the eventual development of the scientific revolution in the 17th century. Another significant influence of Renaissance thought on modern philosophy was the shift in the relationship between reason and faith. Renaissance thinkers began to explore the idea that human reason could coexist with religious belief, challenging the medieval notion that faith alone could provide answers to all questions. This reorientation laid the groundwork for the more secular and rational approach to philosophy that would later be seen in the work of René Descartes, who famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," emphasizing the role of reason as the foundation of knowledge and existence. In conclusion, the intellectual revolution of the Renaissance set the stage for the philosophical advancements that would follow in the modern era. The humanist emphasis on the individual, the rise of empirical inquiry, and the renewed focus on reason all influenced the course of modern philosophy, shaping the ideas of thinkers who would challenge traditional views of knowledge, ethics, and existence. The Renaissance's embrace of human potential and intellectual curiosity continues to resonate in contemporary philosophical thought and inquiry. Chapter 8: The Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution. The Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution are two of the most transformative periods in the history of Western thought, and their connection is deeply intertwined. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on humanism, the rediscovery of classical knowledge, and the spirit of inquiry, laid the intellectual foundation for the scientific revolution that would follow in the 16th and 17th centuries. While the Renaissance focused on the revival of ancient learning, the scientific revolution sought to apply new methods of observation, experimentation, and reasoning to understand the natural world, marking a shift from medieval scholasticism to empirical science. At the heart of the Renaissance was the idea that humans had the capacity for reason and discovery. The renewed interest in the works of Plato, Aristotle, and other ancient philosophers fostered a climate of intellectual curiosity that would push thinkers to explore not only classical literature, but also the natural world. The humanist ideals of individualism, rationalism, and the pursuit of knowledge encouraged scholars and scientists to look beyond traditional sources of authority, including the church, and to develop their own methods for exploring the universe. One of the key developments that emerged from Renaissance thought was the application of empirical observation and mathematics to the study of nature. Leonardo da Vinci, although primarily known for his artistic achievements, also made significant contributions to science. His anatomical studies and detailed sketches of plants, animals, and machines exemplified the Renaissance emphasis on observation and experimentation. Similarly, Nicolaus Copernicus, building on classical ideas, proposed the heliocentric model of the solar system in his work. On the Revolutions of the Celestial Spheres, 1543, challenging the geocentric view that had dominated medieval thought. Copernicus' ideas were revolutionary, laying the groundwork for future scientific advancements and shifting the way humanity understood its place in the cosmos. The scientific revolution, which began to take shape in the 16th century, saw thinkers such as Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and Isaac Newton build on the foundations laid by Renaissance humanism and empirical observation. Galileo's use of the telescope to observe the heavens, Kepler's laws of planetary motion, and Newton's laws of motion and gravity were groundbreaking achievements that changed the course of science. These developments were directly influenced by the Renaissance emphasis on the importance of mathematics, experimentation, and the challenge of established ideas. In conclusion, the Renaissance and the scientific revolution were closely linked by a shared commitment to the pursuit of knowledge, critical thinking, and the rejection of medieval scholasticism. The Renaissance's rediscovery of classical texts, its focus on human potential, and its encouragement of empirical study provided the intellectual groundwork for the scientific discoveries that would transform the understanding of the natural world. Together, these two periods helped shape the modern scientific worldview, advancing humanity's understanding of the universe and its place within it. The role of the Renaissance in shaping modern science. The Renaissance played a crucial role in the development of modern science by fostering an intellectual environment that encouraged observation, experimentation, and critical thinking. This period, which spanned roughly from the 14th to the 17th century, saw a remarkable shift in how people viewed the natural world, moving away from medieval interpretations dominated by religious dogma toward a more empirical and human-centered approach. The Renaissance set the intellectual foundations that would eventually give rise to the scientific revolution and shape the trajectory of modern science. One of the defining features of the Renaissance was its emphasis on humanism, which encouraged a renewed interest in the classics and the human capacity for reason and discovery. Humanists believed in the potential of human beings to shape their own destiny through knowledge, and this belief extended to the study of the natural world. The Renaissance thinkers look back to ancient Greek and Roman scholars whose works emphasized empirical observation and the use of logic to understand nature. This led to the idea that the natural world could be understood and explained through reason and observation, a concept that would later be fundamental to the rise of modern science. Key figures of the Renaissance, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Nicolaus Copernicus, and Galileo Galilei, built upon this foundation by applying these principles to their own scientific inquiries. Leonardo, although primarily known as an artist, was deeply engaged in scientific observation, creating detailed studies of anatomy, mechanics, and the natural world. His work in observing and documenting the human body laid the groundwork for advancements in medicine and physiology. Similarly, Copernicus's heliocentric model of the solar system, published in On the Revolutions of the Celestial Spheres, 1543, challenged the long-held geocentric model and laid the foundation for modern astronomy. Copernicus's ideas were later supported by Galileo, whose use of the telescope to observe celestial bodies provided empirical evidence that further solidified the heliocentric theory. The Renaissance also saw the development of scientific method, which became a cornerstone of modern science. Thinkers like Francis Bacon advocated for a systematic approach to scientific inquiry based on observation, experimentation, and inductive reasoning. This method helped shift the focus of science away from speculation and philosophical reasoning toward empirical data and testable hypotheses, which are central to the scientific process today. In conclusion, the Renaissance was a critical period in shaping the development of modern science. The era's emphasis on humanism, empirical observation, and the revival of classical knowledge provided the intellectual framework for the rise of modern scientific thought. The Renaissance's legacy in fostering scientific curiosity, critical thinking, and the search for knowledge through observation and experimentation directly contributed to the breakthroughs of the scientific revolution and continues to influence the way science is conducted today. Key figures: Galileo, Copernicus, and Kepler. The figures of Nicolaus Copernicus, Galileo Galilei, and Johannes Kepler are central to the transformation of scientific thought that took place during the Renaissance and the subsequent scientific revolution. Together, they revolutionized our understanding of the cosmos and laid the groundwork for modern physics and astronomy. While each had their distinct contributions, their collective work marked the shift from a geocentric to a heliocentric model of the universe, reshaping science and challenging long-held beliefs. Nicolaus Copernicus was the first to propose a model of the universe that placed the sun at its center, a theory that was radically different from the long-established Ptolemaic geocentric model, which placed the Earth at the center of the universe. In his work, De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, published in 1543, Copernicus argued that the Earth and other planets revolved around the Sun in circular orbits. While his theory was initially met with resistance, it marked a major shift in the way humans viewed the cosmos and laid the foundation for future astronomers to build upon. Copernicus's heliocentric theory was pivotal in moving away from medieval theological interpretations of the universe and toward a more empirical, observational approach to science. Building upon Copernicus' ideas, Galileo Galilei made groundbreaking contributions to the understanding of the universe through his use of the telescope and empirical observation. In the early 1600s, Galileo turned the newly invented telescope toward the night sky and made a series of remarkable discoveries. He observed the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the surface of the moon, all of which provided strong evidence for the heliocentric model. Galileo's support for Copernicus's theory, despite strong opposition from the Catholic Church, earned him a reputation as a revolutionary figure in science. His use of observation and experimentation to test theories helped establish the scientific method, a cornerstone of modern scientific inquiry. Johannes Kepler, working in the early 17th century, advanced Copernicus's heliocentric model by discovering the laws of planetary motion. Kepler, using the precise astronomical data of Tycho Brahe, formulated his first law, which stated that planets move in elliptical orbits rather than perfect circles. His second and third laws further refined our understanding of planetary motion, providing mathematical evidence that supported the heliocentric theory. Kepler's work not only provided the mathematical framework for understanding planetary motion, but also contributed to the eventual development of Newton's laws of motion and the law of gravity. In conclusion, the contributions of Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler were instrumental in reshaping our understanding of the universe. Copernicus introduced the heliocentric model, Galileo provided the empirical evidence, and Kepler offered the mathematical precision. Together, they helped to establish the foundation for modern astronomy and physics, influencing scientific thought for centuries to come. Their work marked a shift from medieval views of the cosmos to a more rational, evidence-based understanding that has shaped the trajectory of modern science. The impact of art and science on each other. During the Renaissance, the relationship between art and science became increasingly intertwined, each influencing and enriching the other in profound ways. This period of intellectual and cultural rebirth saw artists and scientists working in parallel, drawing on shared principles of observation, experimentation, and the study of the natural world. As artists sought to represent the human form and the universe with greater realism, they looked to scientific advancements in anatomy, perspective, and light. Conversely, the discoveries and inventions of scientists, particularly in fields like astronomy and engineering, were often inspired by the work of artists and their ability to visualize and communicate complex ideas. One of the most notable examples of the interaction between art and science is the study of human anatomy. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci were not only skilled painters, but also avid anatomists. Da Vinci conducted numerous dissections of human bodies, meticulously recording the structure of muscles, bones, and internal organs through detailed sketches. His anatomical studies helped him portray the human form in unprecedented detail and accuracy, as seen in works like Vitruvian Man. This scientific exploration allowed him to understand the mechanics of the body and apply that knowledge to his paintings, giving his figures a lifelike quality. His work in anatomy also contributed to the broader understanding of human biology, bridging the gap between art and science. Similarly, the development of perspective in art had a direct impact on the advancement of scientific thinking, particularly in the field of optics. Artists like Filippo Brunelleschi and Leonardo da Vinci experimented with perspective to create the illusion of depth and three-dimensional space on flat surfaces. Their mastery of perspective not only revolutionized the world of art, but also contributed to the study of light, vision, and geometry. This understanding of perspective was essential for the development of the scientific study of optics, which would later be advanced by figures like Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler. In turn, scientific discoveries influenced the work of artists by providing new tools, materials, and methods. The invention of the telescope by Galileo Galilei and the subsequent exploration of the cosmos inspired many artists to depict the universe in new ways. The study of light and shadows, central to the work of Caravaggio and other Baroque painters, was informed by scientific advances in understanding how light behaves and how it can be captured on canvas. In conclusion, the Renaissance was a period in which art and science were mutually reinforcing, each contributing to the development and advancement of the other. Artists relied on scientific discoveries to enhance their work, while their own observations and inventions helped to push the boundaries of scientific thought. This collaboration between the two fields laid the foundation for many of the advancements that would define the modern world, illustrating the enduring relationship between the pursuit of beauty and the quest for knowledge. The invention of the printing press and its effect on knowledge. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge and had a profound impact on the course of history. Before the printing press, books were copied by hand, a time-consuming and expensive process that limited access to knowledge to the wealthy and religious elites. Gutenberg's invention made it possible to produce books quickly, cheaply, and in large quantities, democratizing knowledge and enabling it to spread across Europe at an unprecedented rate. This shift played a crucial role in the intellectual and cultural changes of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution. The printing press allowed for the mass production of books, pamphlets, and other written materials, which meant that ideas and information could be distributed more widely and efficiently. One of the most immediate effects of this technological advancement was the spread of humanist literature. Renaissance thinkers, inspired by the classical works of Greece and Rome, were able to share their ideas more widely, contributing to the intellectual climate of the period. The ability to print and distribute classical texts, alongside new works of philosophy, literature, and science, helped fuel the Renaissance's cultural rebirth. The printing press also played a central role in the Reformation. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which challenged the Catholic Church's practices, were quickly reproduced and distributed across Europe. The ability to print and circulate these ideas helped spark religious reform movements and led to the fragmentation of Christianity in Europe. Without the printing press, Luther's ideas might have been limited to a smaller, localized audience. Instead, the printing press ensured that the Reformation reached a much larger audience, profoundly reshaping European religion and politics. In addition to the Reformation, the printing press significantly impacted the scientific revolution. Scientific works that had previously been limited to small, scholarly circles were now able to reach a broader audience. Figures like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler were able to share their discoveries with a global audience, paving the way for the rapid advancement of scientific thought. The printing press allowed for the dissemination of new ideas in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, accelerating the pace of scientific inquiry and leading to the establishment of modern scientific methodologies. In conclusion, the invention of the printing press was a catalyst for the widespread distribution of knowledge. It transformed the way information was shared, enabling ideas to spread across Europe more quickly and efficiently. By making books more accessible, it contributed to the intellectual, religious, and scientific transformations of the Renaissance and beyond, laying the foundation for the modern world. Chapter 9: The Spread of the Renaissance Across Europe. The Renaissance, which began in Italy in the 14th century, eventually spread across Europe, fundamentally transforming the intellectual, artistic, and cultural landscape of the continent. What started as a revival of classical learning and humanism in the city-states of Italy soon gained momentum and influenced regions as diverse as France, England, the Low Countries, Germany, and Spain. Several factors contributed to the spread of Renaissance ideas, including the movement of artists and scholars, the rise of the printing press, and the increased political and economic stability in various European regions. One of the most significant factors in the spread of the Renaissance across Europe was the movement of artists. As the Renaissance flourished in Italy, many artists began traveling to other parts of Europe to work or study. The Medici family in Florence, one of the most important patrons of the arts during the Renaissance, sponsored many artists who went on to spread Renaissance ideas throughout Europe. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael influenced subsequent generations of painters and sculptors, inspiring the development of new techniques such as linear perspective, chiaroscuro, and the accurate depiction of human anatomy. The establishment of royal courts and the rise of patronage also played a significant role in the spread of Renaissance culture. Kings, nobles, and wealthy merchants throughout Europe sought to bring the Renaissance to their courts as a way of demonstrating their cultural and intellectual sophistication. For example, King Francis I of France invited Italian artists, including Leonardo da Vinci, to work in his court. In Spain, the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, supported the flourishing of Renaissance art and architecture. As these monarchs and wealthy elites sought to align themselves with the cultural trends of Italy, they became important patrons of Renaissance art and ideas. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century also accelerated the spread of Renaissance thought. Books, pamphlets, and manuscripts written in the vernacular were now able to be reproduced and disseminated much more quickly and cheaply than ever before. The writings of humanists like Erasmus, Petrarch, and Boccaccio were printed and widely circulated, influencing intellectuals and scholars across Europe. The printing press allowed ideas about humanism, science, and literature to reach a broader audience, further embedding Renaissance principles in European culture. The spread of the Renaissance also aligned with the increased political and economic stability in certain European regions. The rise of powerful monarchies in France, England, and Spain, as well as the expansion of trade and commerce, contributed to a flourishing of intellectual and artistic life. The establishment of universities and scholarly institutions in these regions allowed Renaissance ideas to take root and flourish beyond Italy's borders. In conclusion, the Renaissance spread across Europe due to the convergence of artistic, intellectual, and political forces. The movement of artists, the support of royal courts, the invention of the printing press, and the growth of economic and political stability in various regions all contributed to the widespread influence of Renaissance culture. The spread of these ideas profoundly impacted the course of European history, shaping the development of modern art, science, literature, and philosophy. The influence of the Renaissance in France, Spain, and England. The Renaissance, which began in Italy, gradually spread to other parts of Europe, influencing art, literature, philosophy, and culture across the continent. Among the countries profoundly shaped by Renaissance ideals were France, Spain, and England, each of which adapted and integrated Renaissance ideas in unique ways. The influence of the Renaissance in these regions was largely facilitated by political, cultural, and economic factors, as well as the movement of artists, scholars, and ideas. In France, the Renaissance was marked by the arrival of Italian artists and scholars at the court of King Francis I, who reigned from 1515 to 1547. Francis was a major patron of the arts, seeking to bring the intellectual and artistic achievements of Italy to his own court. One of the most famous figures to join his court was Leonardo da Vinci, who spent the last years of his life in France, influencing French art and culture. French artists such as Jean Clouet and François Clouet began to adopt Italian techniques, including the use of perspective and more realistic depictions of the human figure. Renaissance ideas in France also influenced architecture, as seen in the construction of the Château de Chambord and other royal residences, which combined Gothic and Renaissance styles. The printing press played a significant role in spreading Renaissance literature and humanist ideas in France, with scholars like Erasmus and Rabelais contributing to the intellectual climate of the time. In Spain, the Renaissance period coincided with the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella, who unified Spain and sponsored both exploration and the arts. The Spanish Renaissance was deeply influenced by the Italian and Flemish schools, but it also retained strong ties to Spain's medieval traditions. The most significant cultural development in Spain during the Renaissance was the flourishing of Spanish literature, particularly through the works of writers like Garcilaso de la Vega and Juan Boscan, who were instrumental in bringing Italian Renaissance poetry to Spain. Meanwhile, architecture in Spain also embraced Renaissance elements, particularly in the construction of churches and royal palaces. The Escorial Palace near Madrid, built under King Philip II, is a prime example of Renaissance architecture adapted to Spanish tastes. Spain's Renaissance culture was also influenced by its growing global empire, which introduced new ideas and wealth, contributing to the patronage of the arts. In England, the Renaissance influence was initially slower to take hold, but it grew significantly during the reign of Henry VIII and later under Elizabeth I. The English court became a center of Renaissance culture, particularly in the fields of literature and the arts. Writers like Sir Thomas More, William Shakespeare, and Christopher Marlowe helped shape the English Renaissance, drawing on humanist ideas to explore themes of politics, morality, and human nature. The influence of Italian and classical art spread to England through the work of artists like Hans Holbein the Younger, who became the court painter for Henry VIII. English architecture also saw the incorporation of Renaissance elements, particularly in the design of buildings like Hampton Court Palace, which combined traditional English styles with Renaissance influences. The printing press played a crucial role in spreading Renaissance literature and ideas in England, as works of classical and humanist thought became more widely available. In conclusion, the influence of the Renaissance in France, Spain, and England had lasting cultural and intellectual effects on each country. While each adapted Renaissance ideals in its own way, the movement contributed to a broader European cultural shift, influencing art, literature, philosophy, and architecture. The Renaissance helped to shape modern European identity, providing a foundation for the intellectual, artistic, and political developments of the early modern period. The Northern Renaissance, Art and Humanism in Northern Europe. The Northern Renaissance, which flourished in countries such as Germany, the Netherlands, France, and England, marked a distinctive branch of the broader Renaissance movement that originated in Italy. While the Southern Renaissance focused on the revival of classical antiquity and the exploration of humanism through art, literature, and philosophy, the Northern Renaissance was characterized by a more detailed, realistic approach to art and a humanism that often placed more emphasis on religious reform and individual piety. In Northern Europe, the Renaissance was shaped by both a reverence for classical antiquity and the unique social, religious, and political circumstances of the region. In art, the Northern Renaissance was defined by an attention to minute detail, especially in the portrayal of everyday life, natural landscapes, and religious subjects. Artists such as Jan van Eyck, Albrecht Dürer, and Hieronymus Bosch are among the most famous figures associated with this period. Van Eyck, known for his work on the Arnolfini portrait, pioneered the use of oil paints, which allowed for greater depth of color and precision in depicting textures and light. His meticulous attention to detail, particularly in the rendering of fabrics, faces, and interiors, became a hallmark of Northern European art. Albrecht Dürer, a German artist, brought Renaissance ideals to Northern Europe, blending classical influences with his own Germanic style. Dürer's engravings, woodcuts, and paintings often explored the theme of humanism, and his study of anatomy allowed him to depict the human form with remarkable precision. His works, such as Melancholia I, reflect a deep interest in the intellectual and emotional complexities of the human experience. Dürer's exploration of nature, perspective, and the human figure, influenced by his travels to Italy, helped bridge the gap between the Italian and Northern Renaissance. Northern Renaissance humanism was also distinct in its religious context. Thinkers like Erasmus of Rotterdam championed the humanist principles of classical learning, but he also called for a reform of the Catholic Church. Erasmus's works, such as The Praise of Folly, critiqued church corruption and advocated for a return to Christian values based on the study of the Bible. Unlike the Italian Renaissance humanists, whose focus was often on secular matters, Northern humanists were deeply concerned with religious piety and moral reform, leading to the early stirrings of the Protestant Reformation. In conclusion, the Northern Renaissance was marked by its focus on detailed realism in art, the pursuit of intellectual and religious reform through humanist thought, and a unique blending of classical ideals with the religious concerns of the time. The period contributed to a more accessible, detailed portrayal of human life and paved the way for the social and religious upheavals that would follow in the early modern period. The art and ideas of the Northern Renaissance significantly influenced the development of Western culture, making it a vital chapter in the history of the Renaissance as a whole. The role of the printing press in spreading ideas. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century was one of the most significant technological advancements in history, revolutionizing the way ideas were disseminated and reshaping the course of Western civilization. Prior to the invention of the printing press, books were copied by hand, a slow, labor-intensive process that made them scarce and expensive. Gutenberg's development of movable type printing allowed for the mass production of books, making them more accessible and affordable, and dramatically increasing the spread of knowledge and ideas across Europe. One of the most important impacts of the printing press was its role in the spread of Renaissance humanism. Humanist thinkers like Petrarch, Erasmus, and Thomas More relied on the widespread availability of printed texts to share their ideas and to promote the revival of classical learning. Their works, written in the vernacular and Latin, reached a much wider audience due to the printing press, encouraging intellectual exchange and the growth of humanism throughout Europe. By enabling the rapid distribution of books and pamphlets, the printing press made it easier for ideas from the Italian Renaissance to spread to other parts of Europe, particularly to the Northern Renaissance. In addition to facilitating the spread of humanism, the printing press played a central role in the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which challenged the practices of the Catholic Church, were published and widely distributed with the help of the printing press. The ability to print and distribute Luther's ideas allowed them to reach a large and diverse audience, fueling religious reform movements across Europe. The printing press also facilitated the spread of Reformation pamphlets, sermons, and religious tracts, which helped solidify the Protestant movement and contributed to the religious and political upheavals of the time. The printing press also had a profound impact on scientific thought during the scientific revolution. Works by astronomers like Niccolò Copernicus and Galileo Galilei were distributed to a much larger audience thanks to the printing press, allowing their groundbreaking ideas about the heliocentric model of the solar system and the nature of scientific inquiry to spread rapidly. The dissemination of scientific literature helped to challenge traditional views and contributed to the intellectual shift towards empirical observation and experimentation. In conclusion, the printing press was a transformative force in spreading ideas, facilitating the rapid transmission of knowledge and culture across Europe. It played a key role in the rise of Renaissance humanism, the spread of the Reformation, and the development of scientific thought, marking a pivotal shift in how information was shared and changing the course of history in profound and lasting ways. Key Northern Renaissance artists, Albrecht Dürer and Jan van Eyck. The Northern Renaissance, which flourished in Europe outside of Italy, was characterized by an incredible level of detail, realism, and the application of emerging techniques in art. Among the most influential figures of this period were Albrecht Dürer and Jan van Eyck, whose works bridged the gap between medieval and Renaissance styles, contributing to the growth of Northern European art and helping to redefine the visual culture of the era. Jan van Eyck, a Flemish painter active in the early 15th century, is often credited with revolutionizing the use of oil paints, a medium that would become the hallmark of Northern European art. Van Eyck's detailed and realistic approach to portraiture and religious scenes was groundbreaking for his time. His most famous work, the Arnolfini Portrait, 1434, exemplifies his masterful use of oil paint to achieve rich, luminous colors and a stunning level of detail. In this piece, the intricate textures of the clothing, the reflective surfaces of objects, and the play of light on various materials all demonstrate Van Eyck's unparalleled technical skill. His ability to depict textures, from the fine fabric of garments to the transparency of glass, added a sense of realism that was revolutionary for the period. Van Eyck's meticulous attention to detail and his deep understanding of light and shadow helped to elevate Northern Renaissance painting and made him a pivotal figure in the development of realistic portraiture. Albrecht Dürer, a German artist active in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, is often considered one of the greatest figures of the Northern Renaissance. Dürer was a master of both painting and printmaking, and his works exemplify the integration of the Italian Renaissance's focus on humanism and naturalism with the Northern tradition of intricate detail. Dürer's woodcuts and engravings, such as his Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, 1498, brought dramatic intensity and precision to the print medium, allowing his work to reach a wide audience. In his paintings like Adam and Eve, 1507, Dürer's study of human anatomy and his use of perspective reflected his deep engagement with Renaissance ideals. He was influenced by his travels to Italy, where he studied the works of Italian masters like Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael, but he remained grounded in the precise, detailed style of Northern Europe. Dürer's work brought a new sense of intellectual depth and clarity to Northern art, and his engravings in particular helped establish printmaking as a major artistic medium in Europe. In conclusion, both Jan van Eyck and Albrecht Dürer played pivotal roles in the Northern Renaissance, each contributing uniquely to the evolution of European art. Van Eyck's innovations in oil painting and his extraordinary ability to capture texture and light set new standards for realism, while Dürer's synthesis of Northern and Italian influences and his mastery of printmaking had a profound impact on the development of art in Europe. Their works not only reflected the intellectual and cultural currents of the time, but also helped to shape the direction of art in the centuries to come. Chapter 10. The Decline of the Renaissance. The Renaissance, which began in Italy during the 14th century and spread across Europe over the next few centuries, marked a period of extraordinary cultural, intellectual, and artistic achievement. However, by the late 16th century, the movement began to lose momentum and gradually transitioned into what would be known as the Mannerist period, and eventually the Baroque era. Several factors contributed to the decline of the Renaissance, ranging from political instability and economic decline to shifts in religious and philosophical thought. One of the primary factors that contributed to the decline of the Renaissance was the political turmoil and wars that ravaged Italy and much of Europe during the late 15th and early 16th centuries. Italy, once a powerful and unified force under the influence of city-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan, became a battleground for competing European powers. The French, Spanish, and Holy Roman Empire all sought control over the Italian peninsula, leading to decades of conflict and instability. The sack of Rome in 1527 by the troops of Emperor Charles Fuss is often considered a symbolic event that marked the end of the Renaissance's golden age. Political and military instability disrupted the flourishing of the arts, as many artists and patrons fled or lost their financial support. In addition to political instability, the rise of the Reformation played a significant role in shifting the cultural landscape of Europe. Martin Luther's challenge to the Catholic Church's authority in the early 16th century led to the Protestant Reformation, which drastically altered the religious and intellectual fabric of Europe. As the Protestant movement spread, it led to significant changes in art and thought. Protestant reformers rejected the opulent religious art that had been a hallmark of the Renaissance, favoring simpler, more direct forms of worship. This shift in religious attitudes led to a decline in patronage for Renaissance artists, particularly in areas where Protestantism was gaining strength. Philosophical shifts also contributed to the decline of the Renaissance. The humanist ideals that had driven much of Renaissance thought were challenged by the rise of new intellectual movements, such as skepticism and the early developments of scientific thought. The scientific revolution, which began in the late Renaissance and early modern period, focused on empirical observation and rational inquiry, which increasingly moved away from the humanist emphasis on classical knowledge and individual experience. While the Renaissance had sought to revive ancient philosophies, the emerging emphasis on empirical science and the scientific method began to overshadow the Renaissance's focus on human potential and reason. Finally, the economic decline in certain parts of Europe also impacted the continuation of Renaissance art and thought. As the economic power of city-states in Italy diminished, so too did their ability to support artists and intellectuals. The rise of global trade and the decline of the Italian banking system further shifted the focus away from Renaissance ideals, as other regions such as Spain, Portugal, and later England became the new economic and political powerhouses of Europe. In conclusion, the decline of the Renaissance was driven by a combination of external factors, including political instability, the religious upheavals of the Reformation, shifts in philosophical thought, and economic challenges. While the Renaissance had a profound impact on the course of Western history, the transition to the Baroque era and the scientific advancements of the following centuries marked the end of its dominant cultural influence. However, the legacy of the Renaissance continues to shape the arts, science, and philosophy in the modern world. Political and religious factors leading to the decline. The decline of the Renaissance can be attributed to a complex interplay of political and religious factors that profoundly impacted the cultural and intellectual climate of Europe during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. While the Renaissance had flourished due to political stability, economic prosperity, and the patronage of the arts, these same elements began to erode as political instability, religious conflicts, and changing intellectual currents took hold of Europe. Politically, the once stable Italian city-states, which had been central to the Renaissance, began to experience significant upheaval and decline. Italy, divided into several independent city-states, such as Florence, Venice, and Milan, was increasingly vulnerable to foreign invasions. The constant power struggles between rival states and the invasion of French, Spanish, and Austrian forces devastated the region. The sack of Rome in 1527, when Emperor Charles Vast's troops pillaged the city, symbolized the political and military decline of Italy and marked a blow to the flourishing culture that had defined the Renaissance. The weakening of the Italian states, coupled with the rise of centralized monarchies in other European countries, shifted the political and economic focus away from Italy and the Renaissance ideals it had fostered. Religiously, the Protestant Reformation, which began with Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, had a profound impact on the religious landscape of Europe. The Reformation challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, leading to the division of Christianity and the rise of Protestantism. As Protestant ideas spread throughout Europe, the Catholic Church, which had been a key patron of Renaissance art and culture, found itself embroiled in internal strife. The Protestant rejection of religious imagery and the focus on more austere, iconoclastic worship led to a decline in the demand for art in Protestant regions. Meanwhile, Catholic regions underwent their own counter-reformation, which sought to reaffirm Catholic dogma, but also restricted the arts and intellectual exploration in some ways. The religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants led to a period of instability and warfare, most notably the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, which devastated much of Europe. The war disrupted trade, strained economies, and fostered a climate of fear and uncertainty that hindered intellectual and artistic production. In regions where the Renaissance had flourished, such as Italy and the Low Countries, the focus shifted from intellectual pursuits and the flourishing of the arts to survival and political survival. In conclusion, the decline of the Renaissance was driven by a combination of political instability, foreign invasions, and religious conflict. The upheavals caused by the Reformation and the fracturing of religious unity in Europe, coupled with the military and political struggles in Italy, significantly undermined the social, economic, and intellectual conditions that had allowed the Renaissance to thrive. As these factors took hold, Europe entered a new era, marked by a shift in intellectual focus and the eventual rise of the Baroque period, which moved away from the ideals of the Renaissance. The sack of Rome and the end of the High Renaissance. The sack of Rome in 1527 stands as a pivotal event in the history of the Renaissance, symbolizing the end of the High Renaissance and marking the decline of the flourishing artistic and intellectual movement that had dominated Europe for more than a century. This event, when imperial forces under Emperor Charles Fuss ransacked the city, caused a dramatic shift in the political, religious, and cultural landscape of Italy and Europe at large. The sacking of Rome, along with the political instability and religious turmoil that followed, significantly disrupted the environment that had supported the Renaissance, leading to its decline. Rome, which had been a central hub for Renaissance art and culture, was devastated during the sack. The city's churches, palaces, and libraries were looted, and many of its greatest treasures, including artworks, were destroyed or stolen. Pope Clement VII, a key patron of the arts, was unable to protect the city from the advancing troops, and the papacy, which had been a major sponsor of Renaissance artists like Michelangelo, Raphael, and Bramante, was severely weakened by the event. The sack disrupted the flow of wealth and patronage that had supported the Renaissance, leaving a significant void in artistic and intellectual life in Rome. Many of the leading artists and intellectuals fled, and the atmosphere of creative and political stability that had encouraged Renaissance culture disappeared. Politically, the sack of Rome was part of a larger conflict between the Holy Roman Empire and the French, both of whom had competing claims over Italy. The political instability caused by these ongoing conflicts weakened the city-states of Italy, particularly Florence and Venice, and eroded the influence of the Italian Renaissance. The rise of powerful centralized monarchies in countries like France and Spain also shifted the focus away from Italy, further diminishing the importance of the Italian states as cultural and intellectual centers. The religious implications of the sack were also significant. The event occurred during the height of the Reformation, when the Catholic Church was facing immense internal challenges. The weakening of the papacy and the political and financial instability in Rome compounded the growing tension between Catholicism and Protestantism. The focus of European religious life shifted away from the Catholic Church's dominance, leading to further decline in patronage for the arts and a diminished role for religious institutions in fostering intellectual and artistic life. In conclusion, the sack of Rome in 1527 marked the end of the High Renaissance. The political, cultural, and religious upheavals that followed disrupted the conditions necessary for the flourishing of Renaissance art and intellectual thought. The event symbolized the collapse of the artistic and intellectual climate that had supported the Renaissance, leading to a new era of uncertainty and transition, ultimately giving way to the Baroque period. The legacy of the High Renaissance, however, continued to influence art, science, and culture for centuries to come. The shift toward the Baroque period. The transition from the Renaissance to the Baroque period marked a profound shift in art, architecture, and culture. While the Renaissance focused on harmony, proportion, and the revival of classical ideals, the Baroque period, which began in the early 17th century, embraced emotion, drama, movement, and the grandeur of space. This shift was driven by a combination of political, religious, and social factors, which shaped the cultural landscape of Europe and led to the emergence of the Baroque style. One of the key factors contributing to the shift toward the Baroque was the religious climate of the time. The Renaissance had coincided with the rise of humanism, which emphasized the potential of the individual and often took a secular approach to art and culture. However, by the early 17th century, the influence of the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation had created a more polarized religious environment. The Catholic Church, in particular, sought to reassert its power and authority, using art as a means of inspiring devotion and reinforcing religious themes. The Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, which sought to address the issues raised by the Reformation, endorsed the use of emotionally charged, dramatic art to engage the viewer and evoke a sense of divine presence. The Baroque style, with its emphasis on movement, vivid color, and emotional intensity, was adopted to create a more visceral and immersive religious experience, seen in works by Caravaggio, Bernini, and Peter Paul Rubens. Politically, the Baroque period coincided with the rise of absolute monarchies across Europe. Leaders like Louis XIV of France and Peter the Great of Russia used the grandeur and spectacle of Baroque art and architecture to project their power and control. The lavish palaces and expansive gardens of Versailles, designed by Louis Le Vau and André Nunot, exemplified the Baroque's emphasis on grandeur and theatricality. The Baroque style became a tool of political propaganda, reinforcing the image of monarchs as divine rulers with unchallenged authority. In the visual arts, Baroque artists sought to engage the viewer emotionally, often through dramatic compositions, intense lighting, and dynamic movement. Artists like Caravaggio used chiaroscuro, the contrast of light and dark, to heighten the emotional impact of their works, while Bernini's sculptures, such as the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, conveyed dynamic motion and spiritual intensity. In architecture, the Baroque style favored curvilinear forms, grandiose structures, and an emphasis on creating awe-inspiring experiences through space, as seen in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, redesigned by Bernini. In conclusion, the shift from the Renaissance to the Baroque was influenced by the changing religious, political, and social landscape of 17th century Europe. The Baroque period reflected the desires of the Catholic Church and European monarchies to evoke emotion, create spectacle, and reinforce their power. The dramatic and energetic qualities of Baroque art and architecture represented a departure from the calm, balanced ideals of the Renaissance, marking a new era in Western culture. The lasting impact of the Renaissance on Western culture. The Renaissance, which spanned from the 14th to the 17th century, was a transformative period that shaped the course of Western culture in profound and lasting ways. The intellectual, artistic, and philosophical developments of the Renaissance laid the foundation for the modern world, influencing fields such as science, art, literature, politics, and education. The period's emphasis on humanism, the revival of classical antiquity, and the pursuit of knowledge continues to resonate in contemporary culture, leaving an indelible mark on Western thought and values. One of the most significant impacts of the Renaissance was the revival of classical learning. The humanist scholars of the period looked back to the works of ancient Greece and Rome, not only to rediscover classical texts, but also to reinterpret and integrate their ideas into contemporary life. The study of classical philosophy, literature, and art fostered a renewed belief in the potential of human beings and their ability to shape their own destinies. This focus on individualism and intellectual exploration contributed to the development of modern humanism, which values reason, personal autonomy, and the pursuit of knowledge. Today, the principles of humanism continue to influence fields ranging from ethics to education, underscoring the importance of individual freedom and rational inquiry. In the realm of art, the Renaissance produced some of the most iconic works in Western history, with figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael redefining artistic standards. Their emphasis on realism, anatomical accuracy, and perspective revolutionized the way the human figure and the natural world were represented. The Renaissance also saw the development of new techniques and media, such as oil painting, that would become staples in Western art for centuries to come. The artistic innovations of the period continue to inspire and influence artists today, and Renaissance masterpieces remain central to the study of art history. The scientific revolution, which emerged in the wake of the Renaissance, was another lasting outcome of the period. The Renaissance's focus on empirical observation, critical thinking, and the questioning of established beliefs helped pave the way for the scientific advances of figures like Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton. The development of the scientific method, based on observation, experimentation, and rational analysis, fundamentally changed the way we understand the natural world and is still the cornerstone of modern science. In conclusion, the Renaissance was a pivotal moment in Western culture, one that left an enduring legacy in almost every aspect of intellectual, artistic, and scientific life. Its emphasis on humanism, the rediscovery of classical antiquity, and the pursuit of knowledge and innovation laid the groundwork for the modern age. The cultural and intellectual achievements of the Renaissance continue to shape Western values, institutions, and thinking, ensuring that its influence will be felt for generations to come. Chapter 11: The Legacy of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was not just a moment in history, but a profound cultural movement that laid the groundwork for many aspects of modern Western thought and society. Its intellectual, artistic, and scientific achievements transformed the course of history, and its legacy continues to shape the way we understand the world today. From the ideals of humanism to groundbreaking advancements in art and science, the Renaissance left an enduring mark on Western culture that has resonated for over 5 centuries. One of the most enduring legacies of the Renaissance is its emphasis on humanism, which focused on the value of individual potential and the importance of human reason. Renaissance thinkers sought to revive the classical ideas of Greece and Rome, emphasizing the importance of education, critical thinking, and the pursuit of knowledge. Humanism encouraged individuals to engage with the world around them, to explore new ideas, and to value personal achievement. These ideals were revolutionary at the time and laid the foundation for the intellectual movements that followed, including the Enlightenment. Today, the principles of humanism continue to influence modern education, philosophy, and ethics, promoting ideals such as human rights, liberty, and the pursuit of personal and collective progress. In the realm of art, the Renaissance brought about a transformation in the way artists approached their craft. The development of new techniques, such as linear perspective, chiaroscuro, and a focus on anatomical accuracy, allowed artists to create more realistic and emotionally engaging works. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael are still regarded as some of the greatest masters of Western art, and their work continues to influence artists today. The Renaissance also laid the foundation for the development of modern art movements, which further explored and expanded the boundaries of artistic expression. The scientific revolution, which followed the Renaissance, was also heavily influenced by the period's intellectual climate. The Renaissance encouraged curiosity, observation, and experimentation, all of which were essential to the development of modern science. Pioneers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler were able to build upon the foundations of Renaissance thought to challenge established views of the universe and to establish the scientific method as a way of understanding the natural world. Their work has had a lasting impact, shaping the course of scientific inquiry and technological innovation through to the present day. In conclusion, the legacy of the Renaissance is vast and multifaceted. Its contributions to art, science, philosophy, and human understanding continue to influence contemporary thought and culture. The Renaissance's emphasis on human potential, its celebration of creativity, and its commitment to the pursuit of knowledge laid the groundwork for the modern world. Today, the values and achievements of the Renaissance remain a source of inspiration, reminding us of the power of intellectual and artistic exploration to transform society. The enduring influence of Renaissance art and thought. The Renaissance, which flourished from the 14th to the 17th century, had a profound and lasting impact on the development of Western culture. Its influence on art, science, philosophy, and humanism continues to shape the modern world, laying the foundation for many of the intellectual and artistic movements that followed. The principles established during the Renaissance, the pursuit of knowledge, individual expression, and the celebration of human potential, still resonate today in various aspects of life, from education and politics to the arts and sciences. In the realm of art, the Renaissance revolutionized how artists approached the human figure and the natural world. Through the use of perspective, chiaroscuro, the contrast of light and dark, and a focus on accurate human anatomy, artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael created works that are still regarded as the pinnacle of artistic achievement. Their emphasis on realism and emotional depth in works such as Da Vinci's Mona Lisa and Michelangelo's David transformed the depiction of the human form and laid the groundwork for future generations of artists. Today, Renaissance techniques continue to influence modern artists who still study the works of these masters to understand the principles of composition, light, and the portrayal of human emotion. Renaissance humanism, which emphasized the value of human reason, individual potential, and the revival of classical knowledge, also had a lasting impact on intellectual thought. Humanist thinkers like Petrarch, Erasmus, and Thomas More believed that the study of the classics could improve the individual and society, and their ideas laid the foundation for the development of modern education and philosophy. The Renaissance humanist focus on secularism, individualism, and the pursuit of knowledge directly influenced the Enlightenment, where thinkers like Voltaire and Immanuel Kant would build upon these ideas to challenge authority and promote reason, freedom, and democracy. In science, the Renaissance's embrace of observation, empirical evidence, and critical thinking set the stage for the scientific revolution. Galileo, Copernicus, and Kepler pushed the boundaries of scientific understanding by challenging traditional views of the universe, ushering in a new era of inquiry based on experimentation and observation. The legacy of this scientific mindset continues to influence modern science, with the scientific method remaining a core principle of research and discovery. In conclusion, the enduring influence of Renaissance art and thought is vast and far-reaching. The period's emphasis on creativity, critical thinking, and the celebration of human potential laid the intellectual and cultural foundations for the modern world. Whether through the enduring impact of Renaissance art on contemporary visual culture, the continuing influence of humanist ideals in education and philosophy, or the revolutionary advancements in science that were sparked by the Renaissance's emphasis on empirical observation, its legacy continues to shape our understanding of the world today. The Renaissance and the birth of the modern world. The Renaissance, which spanned from the 14th to the 17th century, is often considered the bridge between the medieval world and the modern era. It was a period of profound cultural, intellectual, and artistic transformation that laid the groundwork for many of the developments that defined the modern world. The Renaissance redefined how people thought about humanity, the universe, and the relationship between the two, encouraging a shift in mindset that would shape the course of history for centuries to come. One of the most important contributions of the Renaissance was the rise of humanism, a philosophical movement that emphasized the potential of the individual, the importance of reason, and the study of classical antiquity. Humanist thinkers such as Petrarch, Erasmus, and Machiavelli sought to revive the classical ideals of Greece and Rome, encouraging a return to reason and the pursuit of knowledge. Humanism shifted the focus away from the religious and supernatural concerns that dominated the medieval period and instead emphasized the capabilities of human beings to shape their own destiny. This intellectual shift played a key role in the development of modern philosophy, politics, and education, influencing the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason. The Renaissance also marked a turning point in art and literature. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael created works that celebrated human beauty and potential while using new techniques such as perspective, chiaroscuro, and a focus on accurate anatomical representation. These innovations not only revolutionized art, but also laid the foundation for the Baroque and neoclassical movements, which would continue to shape Western art for centuries. In literature, writers like Dante, Chaucer, and Shakespeare contributed to the development of modern languages and literary forms, with their works exploring themes of human nature, politics, and society. The Renaissance was also a period of significant scientific advancement, which directly contributed to the birth of the modern scientific world. Thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler challenged traditional views of the universe and paved the way for the scientific revolution. The Renaissance's focus on empirical observation, experimentation, and the use of reason led to the development of the scientific method, which remains a cornerstone of modern scientific inquiry. In conclusion, the Renaissance played a crucial role in the birth of the modern world. By rediscovering classical knowledge, emphasizing human potential, and promoting intellectual and artistic exploration, the Renaissance reshaped Western thought and culture. Its legacy can be seen in the rise of modern philosophy, art, science, and literature, all of which continue to influence contemporary life. The Renaissance was not just a rebirth of ancient ideas, it was the beginning of a new era of human achievement and progress. Preservation of Renaissance masterpieces. The preservation of Renaissance masterpieces is essential not only for maintaining the legacy of one of history's most influential cultural movements, but also for providing future generations with a window into the intellectual, artistic, and scientific achievements that shaped the modern world. The works produced during the Renaissance, whether in the form of paintings, sculptures, or architectural designs, represent the peak of creativity and innovation, and their preservation allows us to connect with the past and continue to appreciate the beauty and ideas that define the period. One of the most iconic examples of Renaissance art that has undergone extensive preservation efforts is Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, housed in the Louvre Museum in Paris. The painting, renowned for its enigmatic smile and groundbreaking use of perspective and light, has been subjected to careful restoration to maintain its integrity. Over the years, the painting has experienced natural deterioration due to factors like exposure to light, temperature fluctuations, and environmental pollution. Conservation specialists have used advanced techniques, including microabrasion and infrared imaging, to uncover the artist's original brushstrokes and enhance the painting's color and clarity. These efforts ensure that future generations can experience the masterpiece in its most authentic form. Similarly, Michelangelo's frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, one of the most famous achievements of Renaissance art, have also faced significant preservation challenges. The ceiling, painted between 1508 and 1512, had suffered from years of accumulated grime, smoke, and water damage. In the 1980s and 1990s, an extensive restoration project was undertaken, using modern technologies such as digital imaging and solvents to remove centuries of dirt and restore the vibrancy of Michelangelo's original colors. The painstaking restoration process revealed many of the fresco's hidden details, including previously obscured figures and more vivid contrasts in light and shadow, helping to restore the masterpiece to its full glory. Architectural preservation is also crucial to maintaining the Renaissance's legacy. Structures like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, designed by Donato Bramante, Michelangelo, and Carlo Maderno, have been subject to ongoing conservation efforts. These include both structural repairs to prevent further damage to the building's iconic dome and delicate restoration work to maintain the intricate frescoes and marble sculptures inside. The preservation of such architectural feats is necessary not only to protect the physical buildings, but also to maintain their symbolic value as centers of artistic, religious, and political influence. In conclusion, the preservation of Renaissance masterpieces is a vital task that allows us to safeguard the artistic, scientific, and intellectual achievements of one of history's most transformative periods. Through careful restoration and modern conservation techniques, we can ensure that these treasures continue to inspire and educate future generations. The legacy of the Renaissance, encapsulated in these masterpieces, remains an essential part of our cultural heritage, reminding us of the enduring power of creativity and human achievement. Renaissance ideas in contemporary culture and education. The ideas and values that emerged during the Renaissance continue to have a profound influence on contemporary culture and education. The period's emphasis on humanism, the revival of classical learning, and the pursuit of knowledge and intellectual freedom laid the foundations for modern thought, shaping everything from the way we approach education to the way we value creativity and individualism. These Renaissance ideals remain integral to modern cultural and educational systems, influencing the way we think, learn, and engage with the world. At the heart of the Renaissance was humanism, which emphasized the potential and dignity of the individual. Renaissance humanists believed that through education, individuals could unlock their intellectual, moral, and artistic potential. This emphasis on personal development and intellectual curiosity is mirrored in modern educational systems, which often promote critical thinking, creativity, and self-expression. The idea that education should not be limited to vocational training, but should also foster broad intellectual growth, is a direct inheritance from Renaissance humanism. Today, schools and universities encourage interdisciplinary learning, much like Renaissance scholars did, integrating subjects such as literature, philosophy, history, and the sciences to create well-rounded individuals capable of critical thought and problem solving. In addition to humanism, the Renaissance's rediscovery of classical antiquity, the works of Plato, Aristotle, and other ancient thinkers, played a major role in shaping modern Western philosophy and the humanities. Renaissance scholars studied these classical texts not just to understand the past, but to engage with enduring questions about human nature, society, and ethics. Today, the study of classical literature, philosophy, and history continues to form the backbone of higher education in many fields. Students of the humanities still engage with the works of ancient philosophers and writers, not only to understand historical contexts, but to explore timeless ideas about justice, morality, and the human condition. The Renaissance's focus on creativity and the integration of art, science, and philosophy also resonates in contemporary culture. Today's emphasis on innovation, artistic expression, and interdisciplinary collaboration draws from the Renaissance's belief in the interconnectedness of various fields. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci, who was not only an artist, but also a scientist and inventor, embody the modern ideal of the polymath, someone who is knowledgeable in and capable of excelling across multiple disciplines. This approach is seen in today's push for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, which is increasingly incorporating the arts to foster more creative, holistic thinkers. In conclusion, Renaissance ideas continue to shape contemporary culture and education. The period's emphasis on individual potential, classical learning, and the integration of knowledge across disciplines laid the groundwork for modern educational philosophies and practices. These ideals continue to inform our approach to education, creativity, and intellectual exploration, ensuring that the Renaissance's legacy remains a vital force in shaping the future of education and culture. Chapter 12, Conclusion. The Renaissance was not just a historical period, but a transformative cultural movement that reshaped the trajectory of Western civilization. Its legacy can be felt in nearly every aspect of modern life, from art and science to politics and philosophy. The Renaissance was marked by a return to classical antiquity, the flourishing of humanism, and a deepened understanding of the human experience. As the intellectual, artistic, and scientific ideas of the time spread across Europe, they created the foundation for many of the ideals and innovations that would define the modern world. The Renaissance's emphasis on humanism, which celebrated human potential, reason, and creativity, continues to influence modern culture and education. It encouraged the pursuit of knowledge, self-expression, and intellectual growth, values that remain central to contemporary educational systems. Through the study of classical texts, the Renaissance revived the idea that humans could shape their own destinies, and this belief in individual agency persists in modern thought. The ideals of humanism continue to inform not only educational curricula, but also our understanding of ethics, politics, and human rights. Artistically, the Renaissance set new standards for representation, perspective, and expression. The works of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and other masters continue to inspire and influence artists today. The techniques developed during the Renaissance, such as the use of perspective and the accurate depiction of the human form, remain integral to both classical and modern art. The Renaissance also laid the groundwork for future artistic movements, influencing everything from the Baroque to modern-day conceptual art. The scientific revolution, which grew out of Renaissance thought, transformed humanity's understanding of the natural world. The emphasis on observation, empirical data, and experimentation during the Renaissance contributed to the development of the scientific method and the groundbreaking discoveries of figures like Galileo, Kepler, and Newton. The Renaissance's focus on knowledge and intellectual exploration set the stage for the modern scientific worldview that continues to shape technology, medicine, and our understanding of the universe. In conclusion, the Renaissance was a pivotal moment in history that left an indelible mark on Western civilization. Its emphasis on human potential, intellectual curiosity, and the integration of art, science, and philosophy laid the groundwork for the modern world. The Renaissance's enduring influence can be seen in contemporary education, art, science, and philosophy, and its ideals continue to inspire progress and innovation today. The legacy of the Renaissance is a reminder of the power of human creativity and the importance of intellectual exploration in shaping the future.